Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Uinta Basin Hydrocarbon Conference, and welcome to Duchesne County. We're grateful to have you here at the Event Center with us, and Duchesne County's excited to have everybody, to welcome everybody. My name is Commissioner Greg Miles with Duchesne County. We want to excuse two of our commissioners, Greg Todd and Irene Hansen, had other commitments with Utah Association of County meetings, and they're out of town, as well as Commissioner Brad Horrocks. But I'd like to recognize Commissioner Bill Stringer and Bart Haslam are with us today. Also like to recognize a few other familiar faces. We are pleased to have with us today Senator Ron Winterton, Senator David Hinkins, Representative Scott Chu, I think, just came in. Also pleased to have Executive Director of the Department of Natural Resources, Mike Styler, and Deputy Director, I think that's correct, Carrie Gibson. And we also have a traveling commissioner, Commissioner Andy Gant from Kane County is with us. We're glad to have him here as well. Want to express appreciation to all of you. This is a coordinated effort. The Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, appreciate them and all the work that they do. And I know I'm going to forget, so I'll just stop. But there's many other groups that help out, and we recognize all of our operators and the relationship that we have. We're grateful for the cooperation that we have in the basin and all that they do. And for each of you, you're each stakeholders in the process, and we appreciate your help. I don't want to detract from the awesomeness of this, so I'm just going to step away now, and I'll turn the time over to John Rogers, the Associate Director of Oil, Gas, and Mining.
Thank you, Commissioner Miles. I appreciate being here. Believe it or not, this is the 10th meeting we've had of this nature. Yeah, is that showing? And it started out as Waxy Crude, and someone felt that name wasn't appropriate, so then we went to Black Wax, and now we're at the Uinta Basin Hydrocarbon Conference, and they just keep getting better. So I appreciate your support in being here. And our first what we'll call a conversation, we're titled Partnering to Create Our Energy Futures. We're going to have Dr. Nelson, who is the Director of the Office of Energy Management and also the advisor to the Governor on Energy. She has worked extensively in the energy industry on policy making and has been a great support to the petroleum industry in Utah. Also, we're going to have Jeff Hartley. He's a consultant that works and establishes sound energy policy locally and nationally, and we appreciate their support. I think we can learn a lot from them and their insight. We have some issues in the basin. We can get the oil out of the ground, we can find the oil, but we got to get it to where it needs to be to increase our value to the state of Utah and to those in the business. So that's what we'd like to talk today. So Dr. Nelson and Jeff, would you like to come up here and we'll just have an informal conversation, and then at the end we'll have some questions if you're up for that. What?
Your laptop's turned off.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's why. All right. They're not going to use it.
Oh, that's why. Okay.
You're sitting up here? We're going to talk loud?
You can huddle around the mic.
Yeah.
Oh, they have mics.
Oh, great. Perfect.
You're in charge.
You want us to both stand up and talk?
Just one at a time.
Oh, okay, great.
Or you can sit. Testing.
Testing 2. I pushed on. Is it on? Okay, I think we're good. So I think the challenge is today, and we have a live video feed, so we want folks to be able to see this. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Laura Nelson. I serve as the Governor's Energy Advisor and also the Executive Director of his Office of Energy. And I have here with me Jeff Hartley, who's been a longtime friend of mine, and he and I have worked on a number of energy issues in the state, really driven to find best policy solutions based on results. And so that kind of gets me to the second challenge, which is we wanted to have a little bit of an informal conversation about the things that we're working on, where we have ideas and considerations around challenges that we see. So we're going to try to continue to have somewhat of an informal conversation, but accommodate standing up so that we can be video conferenced.
Okay.
So I want to just, again, kind of echo what Commissioner Miles said, and also John Rogers. From the Office of Energy Development, we're just really pleased to have an opportunity to partner with the Commission to work with Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining to bring about the Hydrocarbon Conference here in Duchesne. I think this is one of the most important conversations we have every year. We recognize the backbone of our state and our community really is energy, and that's occurring across the state. And certainly what's occurred here in the Uinta Basin for many years has supported great jobs, investment, and state tax revenues, as well as local revenues. So we appreciate, as Commissioner Miles mentioned, the work of all of you as partners in the industry driving to realize results in our productive capacity across oil and also our natural gas resources, because we really have, I think, significant opportunity to lead out on best practices and bring some of the best resources in the world, in my opinion, and I think objectively as well, to the nation and also to the globe. So those are my introductory remarks. I'm going to turn to Jeff for you to make yours.
Well, thank you. It's always a little intimidating for me to be with Laura, speaking with her, because she's one of the smartest people I know. And so I will be challenged to keep up with her. And I just noticed that I was off camera at first. I liked that part. A couple years ago, I spoke at this conference, and I talked about transportation and about the inland port that was then a very in its early stages, and I talked about how that will help facilitate exports of natural resources. And after that, because as it's streamed, some environmental NGOs took me and turned me into memes and put all kinds of hate on websites about my desire to run carbon through Salt Lake City, which actually isn't what the purpose of the inland ports wouldn't be, to go through Salt Lake City unless it's a natural route to go to the Oakland port or something like that. But I guess what I would say initially is it's good to do business in Utah. And I represent a variety of clients, energy companies that do both exploration and production, but I also represent Rocky Mountain Power and others. And for me, the state of Utah is a good partner with business to help us do our business and get our products to market. It's not always as sexy or present as solar, for example, which is big along the Wasatch Front and has and gets a lot of visibility and gets a lot of support that way. But the traditional resources of coal and oil and gas and oil shale and the carbon-rich resources that we have in Utah truly are the lifeblood of this state. And so when we need help with the state to change laws, change regs, and how we're treated as companies, generally speaking, the state of Utah is a good partner. We're held accountable. We're expected to do things right, do things clean as we can, use best available controls. But at the end of the day, the state of Utah has a stated goal to help us be successful, and that's a great partnership to have. So there are a lot of initiatives the state is working on currently, and more that could be done, and I guess that's what we're going to talk about, right?
Yeah, great. I think that was a great overview, Jeff. And maybe I'll just kick it off with something that you said, which is the state's policy really is to advance an all of the above energy strategy. And we are blessed as a state to have an abundance of resources, conventional resources, renewable resources, and unconventional resources, as well as the only uranium mill still operating in North America. So we have the opportunity, I think, to demonstrate, as you said, how to do it right, how to deliver the best practices locally and globally. And I think that that's what we really work to do. We also work to drive innovation and rely on market-based solutions. And when we look to policymakers and we provide advice on specific policy, it really is with those two key things in mind. How can we advance innovation, and how can we have market-driven solutions? And industry is certainly a good partner in that. And as Jeff mentioned, they certainly strive, and I think are accomplishing today, the best practices to manage environmental outcomes. Specifically, you all might be aware that sometimes there is a challenge on air quality here in the basin, and we've been really pleased to have an opportunity to work with Utah State University over here just in Vernal to look at air quality considerations and appreciate the legislature's ongoing support of that initiative. And I think an important fact is that it's been demonstrated that it really is not oil and gas that is the main contributor to the air quality considerations here. Nonetheless, the oil and gas community is partnering with DEQ, in fact, to find solutions to make sure that they're doing best management practices in the field. But what that frees up for us, I think, through this study is to identify what are the causal effects so that we can drive the best solutions. And that's really what we're about. We're about results-driven solutions. We're not about picking winners and losers. We're about finding the data, getting the information that allows us to drive results across all of our energy opportunities. And I think when we consider our environmental goals, that really is our best approach, because when we limit our resources, we limit our technology set, and that, in fact, can lead to less favorable outcomes than we would have otherwise desired. Do you want me to
That's
ask you a
good.
question? Do you want me to ask you a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you want to know what we're doing on infrastructure?
Desperately. What are we doing on infrastructure?
Great. Thank you, Jeff. That is a great question.
My role is easy today.
This is a real conversation, and I think that's what this is about, is real conversations and talking about the work that we're doing. And so I want to mention a real conversation that occurred out here in the Uinta Basin just about a year and a half ago. The Consumer Energy Alliance, the Office of Energy Development, which was myself, the Colorado Energy Office, and the West Slope COGA, Colorado Oil and Gas Association of the West Slope, all got together and we had a conversation around what's happening with our natural gas resources. Just about a year before that, Colorado Mesa University had done a study called the Peons to the Pacific, identifying international opportunities for natural gas consumption in Asia. Utah then entered this conversation with that group about 18 months ago. We subsequently entered into an MOU with the Colorado Energy Office, with the Office of Energy Development, that included a number of partners, including Colorado Mesa University and a number of counties both here in Utah and also in Colorado, to advance a study to look at the potential for natural gas development in our rural communities to drive global solutions and outcomes, and what did we need to get there. And a big part of the study was looking at what do we have in terms of a resource, what do we have in terms of infrastructure, what are our regulatory parameters, what are our policy considerations as we look to advance these types of solutions. We have completed that report. We'll be releasing it in just a couple of months officially at the Governor's Energy Summit on May 30th in Salt Lake City.
When is that again?
May 30th. Governor's
You register
Energy
where?
Summit.
Energy.utah.gov has
Thank
a
you.
link.
Yeah. energy.utah.gov has a link. Thank you. And we actually have Secretary Perry is going to be with us, and I'll mention some other folks that are going to be there as well. But there's been a really, I think, key outcome of this report, which is that the opportunity for the U.S. to play a role in global LNG markets is real and it's profound. We already see that happening on the East Coast in the U.S., but not so much here on the West Coast. And in fact, we have limited opportunities because we don't really have LNG export facilities here on the west side of the country. So one of the things that came out of this report was that we really need to look at what are those LNG export opportunities that can be created here on the west side. We did look to the Pacific Northwest, to the Jordan Cove facility, but we're also looking south to our neighbors in Mexico to expand those opportunities. And one more important thing that I want to mention that is occurring right now today is that 4 counties in Colorado and the Ute Indian tribe are now joining our Memorandum of Understanding to expand Western states and tribal natural gas initiatives. This is, I think, profound because we recognize the power of our natural resources to drive local economic solutions for our counties, for our tribal nations, and then deliver those global results. In fact, China's demand alone for liquefied natural gas is expected to grow by 21% just this year. And so Asian demand for LNG is really not subsiding. We had anticipated significant, perhaps, decline in LNG prices, but we're really seeing a stabilization of those prices because Asian demand is so robust. So now is the time for the U.S. to be involved in this as a matter of geopolitical considerations, environmental considerations, and a real opportunity for Colorado and Utah to be part of that mix.
So sticking on transportation, what else is the state doing in terms of transportation to help? Let's talk about oil. How is the state looking to help move oil, or what could the state do to help move oil to other markets besides the North Salt Lake refineries?
Jeff, I think that's a great question. And I want to couch this in terms of we don't pick winners and losers. Just like we don't pick winners and losers on resources, we don't want to decide what is the best path forward. We really leave that to you all as industry working within this space to identify what are the best infrastructure solutions, pipeline, rail, truck to rail. What are we going to do to provide access to markets? Now, I can tell you specifically from the Office of Energy Development, we do have an incentive called the High Cost Infrastructure Tax Credit incentive, and this incentive can apply to projects that are heavily burdened by infrastructure cost. And we do have 2 projects in the Uinta Basin, one that is specifically designed to advance rail opportunities for export of hydrocarbons, specifically our waxy crude products. And then there is another applicant that has received approval from our board for an incentive that would be an upgrading facility to produce certain types of products from our waxy crudes, because our waxy crudes have a high value in terms of producing synthetic crudes is one example where we can differentiate ourselves from typical crude resources.
And also, in this last legislative session, Senator Winterton ran a bill that would have allowed for oil and gas companies, let's see if I can hold this right, for oil and gas companies to receive the same type of sales tax deductions on their inputs that other industries already benefit from. So in manufacturing and in mining, most of the inputs have sales tax exemption, and that wasn't shared by oil and gas. So Senator Winterton introduced a bill to bring that parity to our industries, which is great. And then we had this little general tax kerfuffle at the state level, and it got really complicated, and they were looking at taxing services, and everything kind of came unraveled on taxes. But that being said, that is still a proposal that we will, that Senator Winterton will advance. Representative Chu has been helpful in that, and Senator Hinkins as well. And we'll look at bringing some more additional tax relief to our industries where we can. And then in addition to that, our state leaders want to know what they can do to help support our industry. And a conversation started a year and a half ago or so with some of the leaders in the legislature who asked, what more does the industry need from the state? How can we be more helpful? And the state puts money into the infrastructure that helps us move our product. There are road improvements on over in Indian Canyon on 191 as well as on Highway 40 every year. There's at least $15 million a year that UDOT does in improvements, passing lane expansion and resurfacing and things like that. But really, to move high volumes out of this basin, we need rail or we need pipeline. And like Laura said, from the state's perspective, the state is agnostic as to what solution comes. It's whatever industry wants and will support, whatever the commercial markets will allow and support. But the state is in a position to be helpful to some degree. And Senator Winterton told me just before we started this meeting that yesterday he had a conversation with the Senate President, Senator Stuart Adams, who's been a longtime supporter of our industries. And Senator Winterton was asked by the Senate President of Utah, what are we doing to help transportation costs for your industries, for your oil and gas, in particular oil? What solutions are we looking at? How can we be more helpful? And that's, in my mind, a great signal from the state to all of us that they do care, they want to be helpful. We need to look at what those mechanisms are and how they work, and it has to be done in a responsible way. But it's nice to know that we have that support at the top. Right.
Yeah, great. Just maybe kind of adding to that, I think what Utah says in terms of its energy policy is really key to recognizing that we are here to do business. And as Jeff said, we're not here to do it with excursion. We're going to do it the right way. But the policies that pass through our legislature really are a strong message with regard to what Utah is about when it comes to energy. So I also want to recognize Senator Winterton, and not just because he was new this year, but Senator Winterton and also Representative Chu for the passage of the Senate Concurrent Resolution 8, which really supported access and development of LNG markets, liquefied natural gas facilities, and development of markets here in the U.S. and specifically on the West Coast. So what we say, I think, in terms of policy and the policy solutions that we develop really are part of creating this very diverse energy ecosystem that we have here in Utah and in the West specifically. And Utah is playing a key role in delivering security and stability regionally. And Jeff mentioned that, we have our coal resources, we have our oil and gas resources, and as we look to bring in more of these renewable resources, these are intermittent resources, and we're looking at how do we use our natural gas plants, how do we use our coal plants to support inclusion of those intermittent resources into the system and realize overall environmental results. And, I think it's important to note that Utah has reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by about 16% in less than 10 years simply by having wise energy policy, and that policy has not resulted in higher energy costs for the state.
The state also does some interesting things in terms of supporting traditional energy sources or oil and gas and coal. And there have been several programs over the last few years that have been implemented by the state to further research and development into other purposes. Both the Utah State and the University of Utah have R&D programs ongoing. The state has a program, USTAR, that has been funded some of these projects, but also there have been some direct appropriations into potential repurposing or reuse of our carbon-based resources, and to see what the next generation of carbon use could be, and whether that's carbon fibers and carbon blacks and nanotechnologies, but also the use of the carbon molecules or carbon chains for other purposes, and they put money into that to try to find new uses for the products that we have, as well as cleaner uses of the products that we already are producing. So that's very helpful for the state.
And I think that's a great segue into something I'd like to add to that, which is that what we're doing in this space is getting national and global attention. And I want to mention just a couple of examples. We had the Assistant Secretary of Fossil Energy, Steve Winberg, here at the end of March. And Steve, Assistant Secretary Winberg, went over to BYU and toured their advanced combustion laboratory, and he also went to some other locations to really get a glimpse into the technology and innovation ecosystem that exists here in the state of Utah. And he is very, very interested in advancing both infrastructure solutions and also market solutions. In other words, driving access to global markets. He was key, in fact, in some of the negotiations that occurred between the U.S. and China with regard to our natural resources. So he's very keen on this, and in fact, he's going to be coming back to Utah for the Energy Summit to have a very specific and deliberate discussion on infrastructure and market access. And we're going to hold a special roundtable with him on May 29th, just the day in advance of the summit. And so we'll be getting invitations and information out on that as well. So Department of Energy is very interested in what we are creating here in Utah. And we're also getting global recognition for what's occurring here in Utah as a good place to do business with really high quality energy resources. And recently we were able to host, Jeff, you were instrumental in this, so thank you, and also to former Speaker Hughes, in bringing in a China delegation to look at our resources here in the Uinta Basin and talk about how our resources could complement the resources that they're importing today, specifically taking a look at our waxy crudes.
Yeah, and in fact, China produces a lot of waxy crude themselves. They have a lot of black wax, but they import 10 million barrels of oil a day into China, and most of it comes from Africa, Russia, Brazil, and some from the U.S., but not a lot from the U.S. The fact that we have waxy crude that would work into some of their existing systems, and the fact that we have yellow wax, which is different and interesting to them, gives them an interest in our product, but the political desire to have some type of trade relationship with the state of Utah is strong, and part of that goes to a 12-year relationship between a sister province in the state of Utah, and part of it goes to the fact that in Utah we have a lot of trained Chinese speakers, and that's interesting to them. We have Chinese immersion language learning in some of our elementary schools. I have two daughters that are in Chinese immersion. My oldest daughter's been in it for 6 years. She's been spends half of her day speaking Chinese. That's interesting to the Chinese, and because of that, they're interested in Utah. Well, we have had two delegations now come look at our oil fields and talk about our product. And we've said to them, why wouldn't you take 10 or 20,000 barrels a day of our product since you're importing 10 million barrels a day already? And you wouldn't have to retool your refineries. It would fit well. And their response was, I don't know. Why wouldn't we do that? That might make a lot of sense. How much can we get it for? And then therein lies the problem. If it costs an additional $20 to get our waxy crude from here to the Gulf, and then whatever the cost to ship it to Asia through the Panama Canal, that's terribly expensive. Laura's efforts with the state of Baja, Mexico, to look at expanding their port to take liquids would be helpful because we can shorten that travel time a lot. But also the ability or the willingness of the state to help write down some of the costs of infrastructure for us is a big deal. But those opportunities are there, and we have representatives from the state who are actively working on those on our behalf, and that's beneficial to all of us. I'd also want to recognize another partner who walked into the room a little late. A lot of you work with SITLA. We work a lot with SITLA at the state level. Dave, you snuck in here late, but SITLA is a great advocate for what we do, whether it's air quality or other regulations or helping us with marketing costs. We appreciate having SITLA as a partner.
So Jeff, I think we have about 20 minutes left, 19 minutes left for our conversation this morning. Should we see if the audience has any questions for us?
Sure.
Susan.
You mentioned there were two proposals for using the high-cost energy infrastructure credit, but you didn't mention what they were.
So the high-cost infrastructure tax credit is an incentive that was passed by the legislature in 2016 and assigned to the Office of Energy Development to administer. And it covers, as I mentioned, projects that have high infrastructure cost, and also conversion of our refineries to produce Tier 3 fuels. It, I think, is an important incentive for driving infrastructure development where it's most needed, and that's typically in rural Utah, to be candid. And so to date, our board has approved a total, Susan, actually of 9 projects, and 6 of those projects are, in fact, in rural Utah. 2 projects specifically here in the basin are one that would expand access to rail facilities, and that's the Price River Terminal. And this is, I think information that is publicly available. And then the second one is Utah Advantage, which is a refinery project that would look to upgrade waxy crude into a refined commodity. And they've both been approved for a tax credit. And I should mention it is a post-production tax credit that is a fixed amount, so it really is meant to be a low-risk incentive to get over the barrier of infrastructure cost. I saw somebody's.
Dr. Nelson, I met your counterpart in Colorado a year ago at a meeting over there. She mentioned the joint situation with Utah and Colorado with your MOU. With your MOU regarding the exporting gas out of both of our states. And I'm tickled to death to hear that the tribe and 4 of the Utah or the Colorado counties have joined that MOU. But my great concern is the Colorado voters this last go around, they voted down the proposal to allow or disallow the state to be in control of their drilling over there and turn it back to the counties and cities. But now, at the present time, the legislator is running it through the process where it may pass very well that the state, their commission will lose their complete control of the oil and gas exploration over there in Colorado and give it back to the cities and municipalities, where they really won't have to depend upon scientific information to determine setbacks and everything else. I wondered if you could explain just where that is today. Do you have any feel on how the legislature is going through with that present proposal in there?
So I'm always hesitant to comment on another state's policy, but let me tell you what I know. What I understand to be the case is that bill, in fact, has passed. What I hear from industry is they're very concerned about the impacts on their ability to operate in the state of Colorado, and that this will, in fact, impose additional cost and risk for production. And one thing that we know, and Jeff and I often talk about, is that capital is a scared thing. It's big and powerful, but it's really scared, and it doesn't like uncertainty. And so this is going to impose additional risk and uncertainty. And I will just say that, I think, really, we are wise in our approach on these issues to create that certainty while still driving the outcomes that we want. And I want to compliment the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining for the work that they do here in the state to have really a solid and safe record around how we operate production here. And that we have, I think, a good collaboration across our state and local governments to assure that we have the most effective and best operations. So what I would say is that it seems that is a new direction for Colorado. The reason that we have the 4 counties that are joining, and I want to be sure and recognize them, so I actually wrote them down. It's going to be Moffett, Garfield, Rio Blanco, and Mesa counties of the West Slope in Colorado, specifically signing the MOU because the Colorado Energy Office will no longer specifically be part of the MOU on a going forward basis. So this is now the Western States Tribal Nation MOU between Utah, these 4 Colorado counties, and the Ute tribe. And we also are working with other tribal nation interests that really see the promise and the opportunity to deliver deliver value to their economies, and with other states as well that are interested in joining this MOU. So we continue to believe that the bipartisan nature of this MOU is going to be realized, that we're going to get out good information. And one of the key things that is an outcome of this report is to have a stakeholder process. So you identify these challenges, exactly what you're talking about, and look for real solutions so that we can overcome it and be part of the global solution. As Jeff mentioned, transportation cost is a real issue when it comes to export of our natural resources, and natural gas is no different. And if we can get better access to markets, that's key. Right now, you've got Russia looking to provide Germany with a new gas supply. Do we think that that's the best from a geopolitical standpoint? Maybe not. And should the U.S. be more involved in Europe? Absolutely. I think from a geopolitical position to continue to have that balance and that healthy tension, which I think is key to the balance. The challenge that we have is that current delivered price of natural gas from Russia to Europe is around $5. And the long-term projections right now for U.S. natural gas are around $6.50 or $7. So we've got to get over that hurdle, really, of transportation if we want to have the access to markets, and we have to be focused on what we're doing here at home to provide cost-effective solutions for production. So that's my answer to your question. JT.
Yeah, you brought up liquefied natural gas, and my question is where is liquefied natural gas being produced within the region? And if it is, how do we get it to where it needs to be? Is liquefied natural gas permitted on railroad?
So, I mean, you're bringing up great questions. What I'll say is that, it is possible to, we are working with parties right now that are interested in doing localized LNG production, if you will, believe that they can produce it at the site, and that they can then move the product, in particular, to Mexico via truck and rail solution. But you're exactly right. The containment issue and how we work with the rail is a key part of how we're going to be able to move that resource. So we have hurdles to overcome. I'm not saying that we don't, but I think that it's worth taking those on and overcoming those challenges.
But specifically, Utah Natural Gas, the reason why we have this alliance on natural gas is our gas can go into the Ruby pipeline, is that correct? They can go north to the northwest to the proposed Jordan Cove LNG facility. That's under FERC review. It's been under FERC review for years. It got stonewalled, I think, under the Obama administration in their last year. They've recently made some progress, though, with FERC. And this year there was a resolution that was run, SCR 8, that I think Senator Winterton, I think you sponsored that, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah. Yeah, and that resolution of support was important signal from us, but it would allow us to sell more gas because we can feed into the pipeline, and that's the important element: is where can we sell more gas so that commodity price can inch up a little bit.
Yeah. So.
What can we do today?
I think that it's a matter of, I think from a policy perspective, mentioning that, that Utah really is, I think, a great place to do business, that we need to continue to work on production, and I think we need to come together and have the conversations around what those solutions are.
And maybe part of that answer is, well, let me do it this way. Let me ask a question. Raise your hand if you are aware of the salt dome storage in Utah that we have going on. So, Laura, maybe about half know about it. Maybe it's worth talking about the salt dome storage and the potential to store gas and other synthetic gases.
Before
yes.
excuse me, before you go any further, I have a question that has to do with your MOI or MOU that you're proposing. What are you going to do about the cases that the Ute tribe has in the federal courts right now? It involves these assets, these resources. What are you going to do about those?
So what I'll say is that, I think economic solutions are really positive outcomes where we can come together and find the win-win potential where we can work together. And so I think we're not in a position to comment on what's occurring in that particular case, but what we want to do is find those positive pathways where we can work with the tribal nations to realize outcomes that are beneficial to their economy, for them to realize their vision without stating what those goals and that vision is. And I think we have identified one possible pathway, and that is through this Western States Tribal Nation MOU.
Okay.
And they are signing it.
And if the Ute tribe loses their bid to own this property, then what? Because you do have another tribe here that does own the resources in this basin.
So we are working with, across tribes.
You're
on
not
issues.
working with the tribe that owns the resources here. I can guarantee you that. And that's what these cases are back in Washington. So my question is, again, what are you going to do about that?
This conversation is open to those who want to participate and be involved. So I would say that absolutely the door is open to working with those tribes to bring in what their goals and vision is for their resources. And I'll go back to the report that we've developed. It specifically highlights the significance of having a stakeholder-driven process, of having an open and transparent process to address issues, to talk about these challenges. So this first report, the first phase of this, really has been to identify what is the resource potential, what infrastructure do we currently have in play. In fact, one of the things that we learned is that Colorado has a lot of infrastructure. Infrastructure investment may not be their biggest bang. So what are the resources that we have? What's the infrastructure we have? What are partners that we would really like to see come to the table? And the tribes are absolutely one of them. And so what I would say is that we are very open to bringing folks into this conversation.
Are you going to be outreaching to this the second tribe here?
I don't see any reason why not.
I don't see any reason why not either, because as from where I sit, it's a pretty crucial thing for you to be doing.
Well, I agree. Thank you for that. We really want them to be part of the conversation. So,
Okay.
yeah, thank you.
Clarification on what you're talking about.
So this would be the memorandum of understanding. It's
second
the.
tribe.
So at this point, I think because we're just in conversation, what I will say is we are talking with other tribes that have approached us about being part of this agreement. And as we move through that, we're happy to have further discussion.
You want to talk about salt dome storage?
I want to talk about salt dome storage.
Because it's cool.
Or or we could, sing because we have
I don't sing
microphones.
here, no.
I don't either. So, so salt dome storage. Utah has a lot of assets, and it's interesting that we have these salt domes here because they're something that are typically found along the Gulf Coast, and in fact, they are used for energy storage today. And these salt domes can store different types of energy commodities, so different types of liquid natural gases, natural gas, oil, other petroleum-based products, as well as hydrogen, which is, I think, something else that we're very interested in looking at in the state. And then they can also store air for compressed air energy storage, which is a form of generation for producing electrons. We'll say that. But these storage facilities can be used to store natural gas, and so we can consider this as we look holistically at the package of infrastructure for storage and shipment of our natural gas resources, and I think it can be an important part of the conversation for not just looking at market opportunities, but talking about security issues in terms of regional and national security for our resources and our energy systems. So we have 4 minutes. So, Dave.
Have you discussed any with the Wyoming counties that are bordering us up here?
Yes.
Getting them into the compact, and how'd that go?
Yes, so we have visited with Wyoming. In fact, we've always considered that having Wyoming involved in this conversation was an important element. So we have been communicating with them. They just haven't signed the MOU.
I'm going to get this wrong as regarding exactly what it was you said, but with regard to air quality challenges we have in the basin and oil and gas, you said not it. Is that, could you expand on that?
So I believe if you go to the USU website, do we have anybody here from DEQ? Oh, okay. Or, well, no, Seth, you can talk about it. Seth can answer questions that you have. Seth has been our leader on air quality monitoring and modeling here in the basin. Seth, thank you. I'm sorry, I saw you sitting up here and I meant to recognize you because I think this is such an important initiative because we want to understand what are the causal factors, and oil and gas, if I understand the information that's been relayed to date, really isn't seen as the primary cause of some of our challenges here in the Uinta Basin, which allows us to consider what are the other causal elements and where can we manage our oil and gas assets to get the results that we want. Where should we? And again, it kind of gets back to that results driven initiative. So Seth, you're welcome to correct me if I'm mistaken, but I will say that there is a report that I've read that says that specifically.
Can I, for just a moment? Yeah, so what I'd say is that emissions, including from oil and gas, are an important part of, or it's really a two-sided coin, or there's two ingredients required to bake that cake, and one is emissions and the other is meteorology. So I think what Dr. Nelson's referring to is that so if our basin and the emissions that we generate from oil and gas were somewhere else without the right meteorology, without the right topography, we wouldn't have the air quality issues that we have. So snow cover, the particular meteorological conditions with very strong inversions, and also unique chemistry that happens in the snow may be a part of it. That's something that our group is researching a lot. But so it's not that our industry is particularly nasty or something like that. It's really about we're unfortunate to be in a place where we have really strong winter inversions and snow cover. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
That's exactly right. So we recognize that there are these other causal factors which are really influencing outcomes or potentially causal factors. And so I think that it allows us to consider what types of solutions do we pursue that are going to get us the results that we want. And I think that is really the main message is how do we get the results we want? And if we simply, I think, take this the statement that industry is to blame, then I don't think we're going to get the solutions that we want. The industry is an important backbone of the community and the economy. I think we're deploying best practices. The industry, I think, works very closely to identify solutions. They've worked with DEQ on those solutions. And so let's consider what is the full suite of causal factors so that we get the right solution. So thank you, Seth.
And maybe I'll answer your question more from an industry perspective. And let me put a caveat that I am not speaking for any of my clients or anyone I know or anyone who used to like me. I'm speaking solely for myself. Another way to say what Seth said is that but for snowfall, we don't have exceedances of EPA standards in this basin. So when there's snow on the ground and it's cold, is that correct?
That's true.
Unless there's snow on the ground and it's cold, we don't have exceedances, which means that when there is snow and we have exceedances, industry production levels don't change. We're producing the days we have warm weather, the days we have cold weather, those production levels are about the same. In fact, after the oil prices went down and production went down, we still had some exceedances at lower levels of production, which tells me it's really not industry. But government regulators can only control certain things. They can't control the natural precursors. They can control industry. So requiring best available controls is one of the tools that they have available to them, and one of the tools that the Division of Air Quality and EPA use with industry. It's a tricky balance from industry's perspective to work with our regulators who have to give us permits to operate. But where we don't want overregulation, and the main companies, the good actors, are willing to check for leaks and fix problems and adopt the best available controls. But there are times when there's a little bit of pushback, and from my perspective, on industry side, it's nice that we have allies in the state that understand that there need to be limitations on some of this stuff, and we've had support from the legislature, we've had support from CITLA, we've had support from county officials and from the Office of Energy Development. But it's a tricky balance because of that.
Great. I think that is an important, remark to conclude, and because I think our time is up. But I want to say, we want to have the conversations. We want to really deliver best outcomes for our energy economy. And as I said, we don't pick the winners and losers, but we do want to drive, I think, solutions that give us the results that we want. We appreciate the important role of industry in driving positive outcomes, of working here in the basin, of our legislature, of our county commissioners, and all of those that are involved in this process. And I will say that we won't always agree on everything, but the most important thing is to come together and talk about the future that we want and that we fundamentally believe that we can create in realizing the best environmental outcomes and the best economic outcomes for our community, for our state, and also for our nation.
Thank you.
We'd like to thank Dr. Nelson and Jeff for that insight, and I think that's very insightful. Bill, as you get hooked up here, I'm gonna. You ready? I would like to make an announcement here to save the date for the Uinta Basin Energy Summit. If you didn't get enough today, there's more coming. August 28th and 29th, it's a two-day forum. This is just the tip of the iceberg, so they wanted me to announce that, and that's always been a great event. That's out in Vernal. And if you've seen this little piece of paper here, this is for you to fill out and put down what you'd like to hear there. If you hear something today you want to know more about, certainly put that down there, and there's a drawing for some prizes. So get that filled out at break time there, and you might take home a nice prize. So, Bill, I'll let you go. Okay.
Gotta set up one link still. I don't need that.
Bill is the state geologist, Bill Keach, and he's been running this for 4 months now?
3 months?
3 months, okay. And he's also the director of the Utah Geological Survey, and he's going to kind of introduce what the survey does, how it provides a science-based arm of oil and gas to the development in Utah. They've done produced water studies, they do oil and gas studies, and reservoir analysis. So I think it's something that goes hand in hand with what we do at the division, and we rely on them. So I'll turn the time over to Bill, and appreciate his. Good go.
Yeah, I get to start 10 minutes early. He's like, can I go 10 minutes long?
Sure.
No.
That answers the crowd.
Answer the crowd. Plugged in there. Are we up? Let's go home. All right. And so I get to precede the great John McLennan. So I found interesting, let's see, where's Earl? Earl? There's Earl Norris. I've known Earl a long time, and Earl said to me, how did a geophysicist become the state geologist? And I thought that was a great question. So then I looked at the titles for the talks, and I said, John's a petroleum engineer. How's he talking about the geologic potential of the Uinta Basin? So I'm looking forward to your comments on geology. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. As John Rogers mentioned, I just came into the survey in January. I sold my house in Linden in November, built a home in Hurricane, and then 3 days after I sold my home, I got called to see if I'd interview for the state geologist job in Salt Lake. So I have a home in Hurricane, and I work in Salt Lake, and I'm all over the state now. So anyway, I'm looking forward to this job. But so this is a little bit of review. Some of you that were at the state legislature, Senator Winterton and a few others may recognize some of the slides here. But it's just an overview of the survey and some of the things we hope to do and how we reach out to the Uinta Basin. So first thing I was asked to do is just introduce myself. It's like, who's Bill? What does Bill do? And so I'm one of these guys who likes to get around the world and look at a lot of cool geology. So that's how a geophysicist gets into geology. But this is a picture from Poas Volcano in Costa Rica. We were there a couple of years ago. I do have a background, BS in geology and a master's in geophysics, which is where I spent most of my career. Started my career in the oil business with Ohio, working the San Joaquin Basin, mapping the whole San Joaquin and Sacramento basins on 2D seismic. Moved to the Gulf of Mexico and spent a few years there drilling wells and doing exploration and doing some of the first 3Ds ever shot in the Gulf of Mexico back in the 80s. Then I moved to the technology side, and I'm a big fan of technology. I worked for a company called Landmark Graphics in their early days, spent 17 years with them through their purchase by Halliburton. But I was their visualization product manager for a long time as we were developing how do we look at the subsurface and in 3 dimensions. And Mark Eccles, who many of you may know, came to me back when he shot that first 3D survey in the Uinta Basin, actually in the state of Utah. Mark and I teamed up in Denver and started working on attributes to help cite some of his early wells. And so got involved in that early on. So then I shifted gears. My wife's from Utah. She wanted to come home to Utah. So I took some positions with the University of Utah at EGI as a research scientist and also at Brigham Young. So I'm probably one of the few people, maybe in the state, that actually is a card-carrying member of both institutions. People say, are you red or are you blue? And I say, well, it depends which game we're playing. I am a big basketball fan. I hold season tickets for both the U and BYU, if that makes any sense, for basketball. So I will root for both. But for the U, I'm actually working right now as an adjunct with the chemical engineering department. They have a Master's of Petroleum Engineering degree, and there's a number of people in the state that have been through that program. And we run a field course for 2 weeks, and we spend 3 days in the Uinta Basin every year. In fact, this is where I'm going to make my plea. With the reduced number of rigs in the state, I'm actually going to be in the Uinta Basin May 11th and 12th, and I'm looking for a rig to visit with a group of about 5 students. So if you got one, you'd let me to come, just see me afterwards. So I am looking for one to bring students to. But a number of companies have hosted us every year and have been very, very good. So then I took a little detour for 18 months to California to work for the equivalent of DOGM in the California's Division of Oil and Gas and Geothermal Resources. So I got a great exposure to regulatory side of the business. So who's the Geological Survey? We're the folks who do a lot of things. You see a picture there with the governor teaching them about maps. We're doing water sampling across the state. We're Jim Davis over here in the upper right, he's got a group of students, grade school, middle school, and he's explaining geology and dinosaurs. We've got Jim Kirkland, he's out there chasing dinosaur bones, and we'll look at that. We study the Great Salt Lake. We study the petroleum systems in the Uinta Basin, but we're about 65 folks that work all over the state and are interested in the geology. But our ultimate goal is to provide timely scientific information, about our environment, about our resources, and about our hazards. That's who the Geological Survey is, and that won't change under my direction. Geology impacts everybody's lives in ways that most people don't ever think about. But we have a group that looks at mineral and resources. We'll talk about them. We interact with recreation. How many millions of people come to Utah every year just to see the geology? I mean, national parks exist in large part because of cool geology. And I think that's one of the great things that we have in our state. As you go to build homes, it gets really crowded, and you got to decide where you're going to build a home. Someone's got to do the studies and understand where you can build and where you can't. So our 5 programs in here is one called Geologic Information and Outreach, whole group of people that oversee our journals. We'll talk about that in a moment. We have people that map the state on an ongoing, continual basis. I'll give overviews of each of these in a moment. We keep track of the hazards everywhere they are. Groundwater, wetlands, and energy and minerals. So our outreach group, they oversee 35 publications a year that we put out, 50 that we publish outside as reports and other journals. We put out a newsletter every 3 to 4 months. Every year in the fall, we hold for about 600 to 700 students to show up at the geological survey, and we teach them about geology and energy. And they come over a couple of days. We do that. We've gone digital, and this is the thing I'm going to show this live here in a moment. But just about every document and every map we've produced is going digital and is accessible online through our database. And by doing that, our traffic has actually gone up. I mean, the amount of people that just log on to the state survey now has gone up like 20+% in the last year, because we've made this huge investment to make the data accessible to folks like you, so that if you want to go build, you want to go drill, you want to know the geology, you can find it. And if you can't find it, call us and we'll tell you where to find it. We'll get it right to you. So it's all interactive. And so here's something I wanted to show you. And hopefully our internet's still connected. There we go. So this is the state of Utah. This is a geology map. This is something that you can access. If I want to see what's going on in Duchesne, I'm going to type in here, Duchesne. I spelled it right, looks like. We can fly into Duchesne, Utah. And if you want to look and understand what the geology is, right here where I think our meeting's right there.
Oh, it's not on the screen.
It's not on the screen. Oh, I can see it on mine. Okay, thank you. How about that? Does that work?
These technologists, I don't know.
Yeah, I know. See if I can drive the cursor. Man, ooh. This is really going to challenge my skills. So here we are. You can get a description of what the geology is there, because I think we're sitting right about there. That's where our building is. You want to see what the geology is here. But we can also do this. See the Uinta Mountains. If you drove in from Vernal today, you could look out there and see where Vernal is. But these tools are available, and as you zoom in, you get more and more detail. So if you're going to build, when I went to actually build a home in Hurricane, I went to this site, and I didn't even work for them. That was last June when I started to build. I went to these maps to look to see where the faults were, what the soil conditions were, so that I made sure I wasn't building on compactive or expansive soils, that I wasn't sitting on top of the fault zone. And so I actually veiled myself with these utilities long before I knew I was going to have this job. So now I get to make sure that it's all right. And so anyway, I just wanted you to be aware that these tools are available to you. Now let's see if I can get rid of that. Good. Okay, there we go. Good. Get back to our slides. But those tools are available to find out anything you need to know about geology in the Uinta Basin. We also publish maps on hazards like faults. Where are all the active faults in the state? I hope some of you are looking at this when you're going to drill wells and other things. You're accessing this type of a data. Our mapping group, a lot of people say, hasn't the whole state already been mapped? I mean, Lehigh-Hinsey, how many years did Lehigh work? I sat in field camps with Lehigh as a student mapping Gunlock, in that part of the world. And the whole thing's been mapped. But I'm trying to make a point here. The map here on your left was mapped by the USGS in 1965. The map on the right was made in 2018. Now, if I'm going to go build a home or put in a plant or drill a well, which geologic map do you want to work off of? The one on the right's got where all the faults are, how the variation in geology. So we're continually upgrading these sorts of information to have the latest and greatest for you. Everybody loves dinosaurs. You know, that's the one thing. In the last year, in the last 2 legislative sessions, we added a state dinosaur in addition to the state fossil. You know, and who drove that? It was kids in the schools. Some kid from down in Utah County says, hey, we need a dinosaur. So we now got the Utah raptor, and the state fossil is the Allosaurus. So we got both going. And this year we added a state reptile. Anybody know what the new state reptile is? Gila monster, yeah. So kids use these, my point is, kids are coming to these resources and coming and asking us to do some things. So this dig here is in Grand County, but there's lots going on. I bring my engineering students out to Dinosaur National Monument every year so they can see kind of the cool bones that you've got out there. Hazards, this is a big part. This is probably one of the fastest growing parts of our group, is keeping track of where the landslides are. We actually put sensors out on landslides after they occur. We may monitor them for years to track how fast, at what rate, and where they're moving to, so that people know, so that city planners, county developers, agencies that provide emergency relief know what the environment is like. We also map groundwater. We do groundwater studies to see how much is in a total basin, how fast the recharge is, where the wetlands are, because population growth is going to demand that we have more water. So we've got to understand where it is and how to utilize it. Energy and minerals is a big part of what we do. When they changed the boundaries of some of the national parks and monuments in southern Utah in the last couple of years, the BLM came to the UGS and asked them to remap where mineral resources so they would know what the impact might be, what you might be missing or what you need to protect. We produced a map like that. Our director or our program manager is Mike Vandenberg. Many of you may know Mike. He's worked a lot in the basin. I asked Mike he was supposed to give this talk, and he had to bail. So Mike actually, I said, Mike, I need 2 or 3 slides, and he sent me 8 of what he's doing. And he sent me a copy of, he wanted me to show like 3 different slides in 12-point type of all the papers and research that we've done in the Uinta Basin alone. So I consolidated here. If you want to know what I'll get you the details later. But we do a lot in the Uinta Basin. We look at cores. We look at, and there's different types of cores. And we have this huge warehouse, which is about full now in Salt Lake City. And we have, 400,000 feet, about 75 miles worth of core. If companies are looking at getting interested in investing, we've had groups that are looking at the Uinta Basin now that have called literally in the last few months to come to the core lab because they want to look at the rocks, they want to understand what the stratigraphy is, they want to understand what the hydrocarbon potential. And so we have those samples in our warehouse. They're available for you to use. They're open to the public. We make it available. The map on the right shows all the places, and you can see all those blue dots. I'll do a zoom up of that. So groups come, and we lay out these cores for you to come study. Now, I had a video here. Let's see if I can get my cursor back. This might have to move to the other screen, too. There we go. Come on. Doesn't want to move over. Got to get it? There we go. This had audio, but due to, if you want the full cinematic effect, you'll have to download it later. But, are you getting it? He's trying to get the audio. No, okay, I kind of hear this little voice. That's all right, the audio part isn't transmitting, but 65 years of people drilling in the state of Utah, about 5 to 10 billion, some people have estimated, of investment to drill that core.
The Core Center's extensive geologic library is an invaluable resource for
You got it.
professionals
Thank you, gentlemen.
geological research and to the development of prospective mineral and energy resources here in Utah.
You might recognize that.
The collection is also considered by the academic community as a fundamental
Can you hear that?
destination to conduct research and learn more about Utah's geologic assets.
Technology part wasn't working.
Our geologists are dedicated to curating this essential collection and fostering its future use for Utah industry and geologic knowledge.
I don't know. We just wanted you to see that we have this big facility.
Learn more about the Utah
We've got
Geological
thousands
Survey,
and hundreds of
Utah
almost
Core
75
Research
miles of
Center's
core.
mission geology.
for you guys to access,
Utah.
if you want to work and analyze what's going on in your basin. They acquired a huge court out of the Green River Formation that people from literally all over the world are coming to look at. Because part of what's going on in the Uinta Basin is what we call the Eocene Formation. And it was a time of climate change. And so the rocks you have here are a direct representation, example of what's probably occurring today, of how the climate is changing. So people are using the rocks to understand that. There we go. Okay, so that's our core lab. But we'd love to build and expand it because we're taking core all the time. People are donating to us, but we need places to put it. So I showed that map a little bit earlier. I told you I'd show you a bigger one. So all of those big dots, you can see how the Uinta Basin is well sampled. We've spent a lot of time acquiring data out here and preserving it, and that's a big part, is the preservation of that data. One other project I just wanted to highlight that we're working in is geothermal. There's a big potential for geothermal out in the western part of our state. We've got 2 geothermal plants, or actually 3 in the state of Utah. But there's a new idea, which is to drill into rocks that are hot but have no water. And to drill 2 wells down into the hot rock, pump cold water in one side, flows across to the other well where it heats up as it moves through the hot rock. We pump that out on the other side to generate geothermal electricity. And it's called enhanced geothermal. So all you need is hot rocks. You don't have to have a plumbing system that already exists. So the DOE has actually funded through the University of Utah a $140 million project. They beat out 4 other national research labs around the country to do this project. And so a couple of years ago, they drilled this first well down to 7,500 feet. And in the last month, they drilled 2 more wells. One down to about 1,000, and another one down to about 3,300 feet. And what they're going to do here is they'll start to frack or crack the rocks in the 7,500-foot well. They've put geophones in a 3,300-foot well and fiber optics. Anybody using fiber optics in the basin to monitor your frack jobs yet? It's a new concept called DAS, but you put a fiber optic cable in your borehole, and whenever you frack, you can actually measure how far apart your cracks are moving. It's a pretty novel concept. And so we're helping them, the University of Utah, by providing a whole bunch of things, like where to put the wells. We're doing gravity measurements. We're taking our drone out. This picture was taken with our drone just a couple weeks ago. Ground deformation, when you frack it, you want to see if you're causing the ground to go up and down. And so we're doing all kinds of stuff. So we participate in research projects that are of interest to the state of Utah. And we're going to continue to seek those types of projects under our direction. And if you've got projects in the Uinta Basin you want us to participate in, we'd love to hear from you and see what we can do. So this is who we are. This is who the UGS is. We are folks that get out. We don't spend much of our time in our office. We get out to the field. We look at water. We look at oil. We look at where the faults are. We look at where the landslides are, and we try and keep track of them and make it available to you. With that, I'm going to say thanks. And I don't know how I'm doing on my time, but yeah, questions. Anybody got questions for the survey? Not a one. Come on. Useful information. Yeah, we want you to come talk to us. I guess if you don't get anything else, we're here. Our job, we don't take politics. We don't do, we don't take sides. Our job is just to make sure you have really good scientific-based information. And that's the best place where decisions and policy can be made from.
You were saying about the 3 wells in the geothermal. What was the 1,000-foot well for?
So they're going to do 2 different wells. One's going to have the fiber optic in, and it's right next to, you can see it, let me back up. It's really close to the pilot well. The other one's farther away. And so by having this triangle, you can actually measure the velocities of the rocks, and we can measure the orientation. We can pinpoint where the fractures are occurring. So that's the point of having the 2 different wells. Well, 3 different wells, but the 2 outside of the primary, so you can triangulate in. Yep. Tom?
For those who may not have seen, we did bring our calendars for the 2019.
Oh, we have a giveaway.
Giveaway. Calendars to people, but some big calendars. Our survey notes that was published last May that deals mainly with Uinta Basin issues for oil and gas is also here, as well as our overview pamphlet of the major oil and gas places, including basin. So help yourself and the brochure out.
Okay. John, you had a question?
Yeah, it's good that Tom just spoke up there because he did a produced water study a few years ago that was really beneficial, and a group of his out of his group, and it was amazing. And I think that's something you can always go for resources. There's just oil and gas, other things, but there are very much things centric to oil and gas in the survey.
Yep, the whole Energy and Minerals group spends a lot of time focusing there. Anybody else? No? Okay, well, thank you for your time. Come see us.
Okay, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. John McLennan from the University of Utah. Dr. McLennan is an engineer, but he specializes in, I'm going to read this right from the website. It says you relate rock mechanics and geomechanics related to exploration, drilling, completions, production, and stimulation. So that covers about everything, right?
Just about.
Okay, and so he's going to give us a little overview of the basin.
Hey, thank you very much. And as my friend Bill pointed out, it is a bit ironic that an engineer is going to give a discussion on geology. Mike Vandenberg was going to be doing it, but Mike has a conflict. So I'll do my best, and I'm sure about 50% of it will be factual. Now, just sort of to get back at Bill a little bit, I have to remind us all about the old joke about the difference between an engineer, a geologist, and a geophysicist. Okay? So if you ask an engineer what 2 plus 2 is, he's going to tell you it's 4.0. If I ask John Rogers what it is, he's going to tell me it's about 4. Bill, do you want to come up and say what a geophysicist would say? No, I'll answer. Bill would say, well, what do you want it to be? So, it looks like my talk is over.
That was great. Let's see what we got going on here.
Anyways, I did get information from Mike.
Forward.
From Mike Vandenberg. And Mike actually gave a very nice SPE talk last December. And so he sent me the context of this talk, and I've tried to adopt it. And a clever title, eh? He's talking about what is Utah's other Great Lake. Well, we know the Great Salt Lake, and apologies to my friends in Utah County. It's not, the second lake is not Utah Lake. The second lake is, frankly, Lake Uinta. Lake Uinta is a geologic lake that formed fundamentally the Uinta Basin. And as we all know, the Uinta Basin that's shown in the outline here contains oil properties and it contains gas properties. And as Bill mentioned, these are of Eocene age. This is relatively young. This is like 50 million years ago. And most of these formations, as you operators know, are either the Green River Formation or the Wasatch Formation, or possibly some operations in the Flagstaff. Up to the present time, most of these operations have been vertical wells, although, as you'll see in a subsequent slide, we do have direct horizontal wells that are starting to make a significant impact in the basin. Now, the origin of these formations is largely lacustrine. It means lake-oriented, Lake Uinta. And these are fluvial deltaic sands or they can be carbonates. And historically, in terms of the oil extraction, we've been using water floods, very effectively using water floods. More and more now, some of the wells in the Central Basin are primary production. The focus of this talk will be largely on oil, but I do want to acknowledge the substantial contribution of gas in this play. And as was pointed out from the questions earlier on about moving gas out of the basin and LNG, gas is going to be particularly important in the future, and understanding how to do that is going to be relevant. So most of these gas fields are Cretaceous, a little bit older, to Eocene. The Wasatch or the Mesa Verde, they're mostly directional wells, although there are a few horizontal wells, and they're fluvial, tight sands in general. And indeed, these are mostly treated with fracturing. And so the key formations that you can see on the bottom of this are the Mancos Formation. You know, always a bridesmaid, never a bride, but the time will come for the Mancos. Above that, we have the Mesa Verde. Then we'll have the formations that we're talking about in this particular talk, the formations that track the history of the Uinta Basin. Now, we just have to add the context here that this really is a substantial contributor to the state of Utah, and I'm very optimistic on the future in terms of people finding these resources. Look at this. I mean, 80,000 barrels a day. The lighter shading shows outside of the Uinta Basin, and only being able to get these resources out of the reserves, out of the basin, is what's going to hold us up. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about that subsequently, and we've heard about that already. But the Green River and the Wasatch formations basically form a record of these ancient lakes. So this is from the Eocene, maybe 57 million years ago, and you can see the contours of Lake Uinta at its maximum, and Lake Goshute in Wyoming. And these were the locations where the formations that we deal with on a day-to-day basis were formed. And we're sort of going to walk through the formation of some of these formations from an engineer's perspective. And nothing's particularly complicated. We have this lake, and this lake would expand during transgression. It would retract during regression. And you can see at the maximum during the transgressions, we're commonly getting carbonates deposited. At the minimum during regression, we're getting the formation of the fluvial, the sands, the river-oriented formations. And the sourcing of those formations is from the surrounding mountains formed during tectonic events. And I just want to point out that, as Bill said, there's substantial resources at the Utah Geologic Survey that outline many of these things. And it's quite complicated. You know, trying to get geologists to even agree on what they're going to label a formation is quite difficult, as you can see from this particular formation in one area. Anyways, there's an abundance of resource on this. So let's look at some of the formations that we're worried about as resource plays or as potential future reserves from this perspective. The oldest of these that we're going to talk about is the Flagstaff limestone, and it was formed by ancient Lake Flagstaff. That you can see that lake basically formed on the western part of the Uinta Basin, and a tongue of it went into the Wasatch Plateau. And this is a freshwater lake, and in that freshwater lake, it was organic rich carbonates and mollusks, and it's interbedded with siliciclastic, so those are sand-rich formations, intervals, which we call the Wasatch tongues. And so this is a potential play, and it is a play where people are looking at this carbonate, this limestone. If we move a little farther up, as you can see from the arrow on the stratigraphic column on the right-hand side, we're talking about the Wasatch or the Colton Formation. And this is a formation that we're looking at more and more in terms of the oil-bearing plays, and it's a formation that we've been familiar with in terms of the gas plays for quite some time. Fluvial sands, that means river origin, sands and muds. And you know, one of the points that Bill brought out is that, you know, climate change was going on here. So really, a relevant question is, what is the source of the water in these ancient lakes? And I know that question keeps Bill up at nights. Anyways, on top of that, we have the formation that many of us are very familiar with, and this is the Utland Butte member of the Green River Formation. So above the Wasatch, we have the Green River, and the Green River has a number of formations that are composing it, and one of the ones that is of most interest is the Utland Butte. And this is once again a freshwater facies, and you can see the lake is at close to maximum extent, not maximum, but close to extent. Carbonates, freshwater facies, and these are bivalves and gastropods are some of the livestock that were present at that time. It's dominantly carbonates, limestones, and dolomites, and we tend to focus on the dolomites as zones of porosity. Now, I know there's lots of folks in the room that do this on a day-to-day basis, and they can correct me, and so please step in if this is not completely accurate. Above that, we're talking about the Wasatch, the Castle Peak, associated with a regression. The lake, you can see, is getting smaller. Under those circumstances, we're having coarser grain materials deposited in river settings and deltaic settings, and there are some muds, and in oxidized regions near shore, we're getting red beds forming. Above that and way above it, and I'm skipping some of the formations, we have the mahogany zone. The mahogany zone that we're all very familiar with in terms of the ultimate potential for oil shale extraction from that zone. Oil shale being, a misnomer because it's a carbonate, not a shale, and oil being a misnomer because it's kerogen, which is a precursor to oil. But at some time, and we will see production of synthetic crudes from this formation. Anyways, so that's the background. What are we looking at? Well, this is maybe a few months old, but we've drilled almost 17,000 wells in the state. And of those wells, how many of you think are horizontal? Any guesses?
200, 300.
Oh man, we've got a couple of people here who've been studying. We've had a guess at 300 and we've had a guess at 280. So around about November, it was a 285, okay? So a pretty small percentage. But these wells have had a tremendous impact, particularly in the Utland Butte and other areas. And if we take and we circle some of the production from this particular area, we can see that these are decent wells, right? They're IPing in the first month at 2,000, 2,500 BOE equivalent. And a significant part of that is oil. And so this is a substantial national resource that can compete with the Permian, it can compete with the Bakken, it can compete with the Eagle Ford. And so there's a lot of interest in this. This is an excellent investment in terms of this. The two things to notice on this particular map, though, however, are the contours. And this is a contour where the pressure is above hydrostatic, so quote-unquote overpressured. And in terms of an engineering perspective, this is one of the things that we're looking at, okay, because this provides the energy that's driving production. So this is a pressure that's greater than 0.433 psi per foot. That's what you would have with water. If you had a column of water, if it was 10,000 feet deep, you'd have a pressure of 4,330 psi if it was fresh water. Now we've got a pressure that's above that in this particular area. And that's consistent with providing the driving force that really drives the production in this particular area. And you'll notice the other line that's relevant here at the present time is this is the upper contour of exposure or occurrence of the Utland Butte Formation that we talked about. And that's been relevant too. So really a fantastic resource in this, and you can see some of the other plays that are operational. We have the Castle Peak. That is a more conventional resource. It's a siliciclastic, means silica-rich. Clastic means erosionally derived sandstone reservoirs. Tight, needs to be fractured, but it's a potential resource that is significant. We have the Flagstaff Formation that, well, I guess actually this is probably Wasatch production, Wasatch and Flagstaff production, that we're seeing people moving into with horizontal completions. So what you've got there is you've got lines showing the directionality of the wells that are drilled, drawn to scale. The larger squares are township boundaries, so some of these wells are a couple of miles long, covering 2 sections. And you can see, based on the scale to the bottom left, well, we'll go back to the bottom left, that once again, this is a substantial resource and really, really significant production that's in play and developing. If we move on further, what really brought attention in the last 8, 10, 12 years to this part of the world has been the production from the Uteland Butte Formation. And you can see horizontal completions, either single section or double section length horizontal wells with world-class oil production coming from those wells. And the production from the Uteland Butte is characteristically from the dolomitic members. They're not particularly thick, but there tend to be at least 3 zones, or typically 3 zones, PZ1, PZ1 prime, PZ2. Other people have different nomenclature, interspaced with carbonates, with other carbonates, with limestones, and bounded by the shales on the outside. And this play, when it's stimulated and treated, is treated in the dolomites, but the fractures are likely growing up into the limestones around that are fractured, and it is a significant play that is derived there. So all in all, this is what we've got at the present time. Okay, we've got an area that's shaded in mauve or whatever that color is there, and this is our sweet spot at the present time. And there's lots of room for additional production in this particular area, but our challenge in the future is to move outside of that region, to move outside of the overpressured region and to be able to improve our production potential out there. So from an engineering perspective, we'll have 2 slides here, two, 3, maybe more. There's some things that we have to think about. This is a fantastic resource, but there's some challenges that we're going to have to deal with. Okay, our challenges are moving to these other resources and being able to treat those and stimulate them effectively and recover them. And then the second thing that we're probably going to have to deal with, fundamentally from a shareholder perspective at the very least, but from a practical engineering perspective, are what are called parent-child relationships. This is what's really starting to impact the Permian, the Delaware, the Scoop and Stack, and basins like that. And what's happening are the issues of frac hits, basically being that you treat one particular well and it fracks into a second. So that's one issue to deal with, frac hits. The second is parent-child, that you drill one well, you frack that well, you stimulate that well, you produce that well for a couple of years, and then you drill an offset well. The offset's the child. And we all know what children do to parents, okay? They try and extract resources from their parents. And so what happens typically is because of the production from the parent well, the productive potential of the child is jeopardized, and the presence of the child jeopardizes the continuing production of the parent. And so this has become a Wall Street issue. This is the one technology that you can read about on Wall Street now in terms of the petroleum industry, meaning that reserves are being reduced from what previous estimates were because of parent-child relationships. So I think this is something we need to treat very, very seriously in this particular basin, because we want wells to be close together. We want situations where we're not having frac hits that are shown in the bottom picture there, where you're growing a frac from one well to another. But we want those fractures to cover as much of the area between these 2 wells as possible so that we can increase our EUR. And so real challenges in terms of optimizing our treatments, some things that we can do to minimize parent-child relationships and frac hits that we can talk about offline sometime. The second thing we want to do is we want to recognize that moving out of here, out of this area, moving to the south and other areas, we're dealing with underpressured reservoirs. And so underpressured reservoirs are not new. They've been challenges in the past, but particularly with the low permeability reservoirs that we've been developing in the last 15 years, we've seen significant issues in terms of economic production from reservoirs where the pressure is below hydrostatic. And in fact, the reservoirs that are most successful tend to be the reservoirs that have a pressure gradient, a pore pressure gradient that's 0.5, 0.6, even 0.7 psi per foot, whereas under pressure is below 0.43 psi per foot. And so there are some things that we probably have to think about. We probably have to be making smaller treatments, but maybe more stages. Maybe we need to be doing energized treatments. Energized means pumping nitrogen carbon dioxide fracs. We've been trying to make that work for 20 years, for 30 years even, with limited success, largely because of cost. But fundamentally, we need to understand what the consequences of these underpressures are and just move ahead in terms of appropriately stimulating them. And there may be things that we can do in terms of these reservoirs. We may be able to just improve production by accelerating flowback. Because the biggest consequence of what happens in these underpressured reservoirs is you put fluid in there and there's capillary pressure that just sucks that fluid in, it imbibes that fluid, it does not want to let that fluid come back out, and so what you have is an increased water saturation that inhibits the production of your hydrocarbons subsequently. So there are a lot of things that we can do in terms of looking at the size of these treatments, minimizing the amount of water that's put in, and even moving ahead. We can see in a lot of other parts of the country, people are looking at gas injection. We're not talking about CO2. It's not practical in the basin without supply. But we have enough natural gas, we have enough methane, and sometimes we have enough wet gas that potentially that can be injected to improve the production from some of these underpressured zones. So there's a lot of things that we can do, a lot of engineering challenges, but the bottom line to all of this is it's a fantastic resource and there's a great future for this particular basin. And I'd be happy to try and answer any questions. If there are geologic questions, I'll let the geophysicist in the crowd answer them. Thank you.
John, would you go back to the previous slide that talked about some of the ways to minimize communication between the wells?
Oh.
In an overpressured region, the slide after this. This one, would you just explain that a little bit?
So if we look at this particular slide, and it wasn't designed for this purpose, so just pretend that verbiage isn't there. This is one particular case where there are two wells that are relatively close together, and for whatever reason, whether it's the geologic circumstances or the size of the treatments that were pumped, what you're doing is that you're having frac hits on this particular well. This is not an illustration of a parent-child relationship. Well, it could be. This is a situation where, because of the size of the treatment and the geologic circumstances that favored fractures running in this direction, fractures will always run in the direction of the maximum principal stress. That what you're having is you're having one fracture intersect a second fracture. Now, if you do this at the start of the development, and this is why many people are going to tank developments where they drill multiple wells together and try and charge the reservoirs, the consequences of interacting between one well and another are less severe. They're still significant because you've got a lot of sand that you clean out. But suppose that this well was producing, because of the production from that well, you have a lower pressurized region here. That production also tends to reduce the stresses. And so it's a magnet for fractures from a second well that's drilled after some production has occurred. And those fractures will tend to even more favorably move towards the second well. And so what that does is that in that circumstance, the production, the frac would go towards this well. You'd have less fractures developed out here, so you'd have less coverage with your fractures, and you're putting sand into this production well. And so cleanouts in the production well, it's a big deal. And so many people are looking at prophylactic treatments where what would be done in the production well is they'd shut it down, they'd repressurize that well. There are a lot of things that people are doing. It's probably the greatest challenge, or at least what we read about the most in the stimulation industry today.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you, Dr. McLennan. We appreciate that. It's very insightful. So why don't we go ahead and take a break till about 5 before the hour, and we'll come back for the remainder of our. Awesome. Thank you.
Pop this one off just in case. Okay, great. Okay. I'm going to leave this one with you.
Just send me an email.
gonna have small family. That would be great.
I'll just put the camera down.
Okay, well, that's fine. And I'll have this ready to go. The second one ready to go. Okay, great. All right. So far, it looks pretty good. Yeah. Well, what do you think?
Audio, but it's okay. Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Richard. Going okay? Yeah. What?
Okay.
Okay, I can say, I'm trying to get out here.
Yes, Jeffrey.
I can see this. Okay, so I got to say a short there.
Okay. Yeah. I've got some notes. You got done. I was recording it with our guys. Like killing it. Really, it's like Jim Davis. Sure. He gets in the classroom. We built a bunch of kids for schools tomorrow. I'm super Jim. Oh, you're good. We're on the third submission. One more guy. I haven't met him yet. Earl.
He's sitting on that side.
Send me an email if you
He's
want.
here.
Jim's here. We should share. Yeah, talk about some of the things that we've got guys that do doing right. Why not borrow? I'm a thief. I tell people I'm a thief. Yeah, cool. When I used to travel around doing as a trainer for technology, I'd walk in and say, well, we know in our bases, I'm going to borrow that skill.
Are you getting our welcome back or me?
Good, good.
Okay, then I will.
Because you know, a lot of the geology is focused on the point. We get a lot of emails from that.
Welcome back.
Yeah, let's share it. Okay, great. So where are you here? So I'd start with, let me write his name, Jim Davis. He gets out a lot. There are some others, but I'd probably start with Jim. Jim handles a lot of our public inquiries. I don't know. You can find it. If you can't send me an email, how many of those are there? I don't know. There's only one Bill Keach at Utah. There's only one. Okay. So just remind me your name again. Richard. Richard. Yeah. Yeah. Getting the public aware.
Really want now?
Is a huge part. California shut it all down. Shut it down. The previous governor, who was a green leader, Jerry Brown, then I came to Ranger Jerry. But he was really pragmatic. He realized, he understood the impact. What up, Bill? Hello. How you doing? All right.
Oh, is that right? I'm a little bit baseball.
Look out, you know, big crowd. His dad is here. I heard his dad.
And that's not,
It is.
Hi. Yeah, well, I mean,
Al Walker. Silicon Valley. You pulled me over there. You did. And I didn't really have plans to, you know.
it's a two-sided coin, so you can say it.
No one was open up. Meteorologists and some meteorologists. Two people sent me the
They would have to run emissions, so it's on emissions fault, right? So it's a pretty,
I don't know who we are.
but it's fair that we are in a unique situation, just like Salt Lake is in a unique situation.
But you know, because I've done like what you have. Kind of had to suspect
So are you working on the 2017 inventory? You mentioned that. Do you have an idea when it might be released?
Everything you need?
What?
Oh, good.
Everything's going good. Okay.
Oh, I get a new inventory. It was about pink and more of that. I'm updating that tool, or are they providing the results?
Good to see you. I will probably I learned a lot about UIC in California.
Yeah, right. Okay. It's good anyway. Yeah, right.
I know the legal now.
We used to use them.
Okay, if we could get people to funnel in, we'll get going again. We'll call the meeting back to order. Grateful for the topics that have been discussed and for presenters. We've had some great discussion here today. I'd like to announce that today at 2:30 p.m., in conjunction with the local ozone working group, Tri-County Health will be awarding the first LoRa Awards in the basin to help address air quality issues with relating to the ozone. The Tri-County Health Board felt it was a great opportunity to recognize the voluntary improvements that operators are making, or the steps that they're making to help make our air quality or our ozone problems better in the basin. And so that will be at, like I said, at 2:30 p.m. at the Crossroads Senior Center in Roosevelt. And then tonight will also be the roundtable discussion at 6 p.m. At this time, we'd like to turn the time over to Rulon Gill, who is the board chair of Oil, Gas, and Mining, and I'll let him introduce himself. And he said the bio was lengthy, and he would like to do it himself.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rulon.
I'm pleased to be here, and thank you for coming. I work for the holding company called Questar Corporation. A lot of you know this, one of the subsidiaries, Questar Gas or Questar Pipeline or QEP. But my experience is with oil and gas. What I'm going to do is give you a couple of analogies before I start the introductions of our panel members. And then I'll introduce them. Each of them will have a short time for presentation. Then we'll come back for some questions that I have, and if we have time, we will entertain questions from the audience. A lot of people know the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, but not everyone knows much about the Board of Oil, Gas, and Mining, which I'm the chair. And we have about 5 different functions. The first, we're a partner with the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining in trying to create a regulatory environment that is predictable and that you know the rules of the game before you play. We have unique authority. There's only 3, of all the hundreds of boards in state government, there's only 3 that are considered expert enough that if you appeal one of our orders or our rules, it goes directly from us to the Utah Supreme Court, bypassing the district court and the Court of Appeals. We have the unique authority in terms of spacing, well siting, and compulsory pooling. We also, it's our board that writes the rules and the regulations that a lot of you know a lot about. We're also a judge once a month if there's a dispute. We actually have the authority to subpoena and do all the things that a normal judge would do. And then our final job is to look down the road about 5 or more years and say, what does the state need to do to be ready for the industry? And that's something we're working very hard on, and these kind of panels help us a lot. So here's my first analogy. If this were a military setting today, I would say, well, we have 2 4-star generals, and we have 2 hotshot young field commanders who are being groomed for 4-star general. Does that kind of put it in perspective? If my second analogy is that if this were an economics conference, I'd say these 4 gentlemen here start the money stream that goes to you. So if you're involved in the oil and gas industry or regulation or county, it has to start somewhere, and it starts with these guys. They have the authority to write the checks that start it. And last year, these 4 gentlemen and a couple others spent about $600 million. That's what kind of the checks that they wrote. So I hope that kind of gives you the idea. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. The first, I want to introduce Matt Leggett. And I did those 2 analogies. These guys have a bio that's that long. If I could read it all, but then we'd use all the time. So I'm going to tell you basically what they do, but please be assured, these guys have done a lot. So Matt Leggett is the Senior Development Manager for Encana Newfield. He was just stolen away from another couple of companies. He's been in his job since February, and already he's up to speed. Next, we have John Cola, who's the Manager of Operations for Crescent Point. John, you raise your hand. Got it. Third, we have Jim Finley. Jim is the CEO of Finley Resources. Not only Finley Resources, but Finley Resource Group. He has started a number of companies that are do a number of things in the oil patch. And finally, we have Earl Norris, who's the CEO of Bear Lake Resources. And I'll let you guys figure out which one of the 4 stars and who the young hotshots are. And with that, we're going to start with Matt Leggett.
Oh, did you? Did you want to go? This is Crescent Point.
Yeah, he changed the order on me.
Yeah, there you go. All right. And then to go forward.
There you go. And there's the pointer. Just got
back. All right, can you hear me okay? Yep, that's good. Well, first of all, I want to thank Mr. Gill for the introduction. I appreciate that. And I want to thank the Division of Oil and Gas Minerals here for the opportunity to put this conference together, so thank you. And I also want to say thank you for the opportunity to have Encana present today and tell you a little bit more about who we are, our position in the basin, our accomplishments that we've had, horizontal drilling in the basin, and a little bit about what we're thinking in terms of queue development and what that could mean for the basin. Before I get started, a little color on me and a little context. I actually worked the Uinta Basin from 2015 to 2017 at Newfield Exploration. And at that time, when I took over as asset manager, we had dropped rigs because the price and commodities had fallen apart. And so I joined a team of reservoir engineers and geologists and geophysicists, and together with our leadership, we got confidence to bring the rig back into the basin and made a lot of headwinds in terms of our cost structure, timing of our projects, and our completion designs. And it was just a real rewarding experience for me, an opportunity that I really appreciated. And so when Newfield and Encana came together here in February, I had the opportunity to come back to the Uinta Basin. And I can tell you, I am just extremely excited and happy to be part of the efforts in the Uinta Basin for Encana and excited to be part of the potential of the basin. So a little bit about myself in that regard. I'm going to go into talking a little bit about Encana first. So this is our first slide. With Newfield and Encana coming together, that makes us the second largest shale producer in North America. We have offices in Denver, Calgary, the Woodlands, and we have field offices all across our operations. And of course, that means we've got a field office here in the Uinta Basin. We've got continuous, large core positions across many of the top plays in North America. And some of those are listed here on the screen. As you can see, Permian, Montney, Anadarko, Eagleford, Williston, Duvernay, and of course here in the Williston Basin, or in the Uinta Basin. As you can see on the screen, there's a lot of information on the right-hand side. There's a map that shows our different areas of operations, a table that shows some of our production and our leasehold position, and then some information about our reserves breakout as a company. At a high level, you'll see that 3 areas are where most of our production is coming from in Encana, and that is the Permian, the Montney, and the Anadarko. And so that's where most of our capital is going to as well. So those are the 3 main areas of capital and production right now within Encana. But we do spend capital and efforts outside of those areas, and Uinta is one of those areas. As a company, we are 2 billion barrels of reserves, and we have over 1.8 million acres across our position on all these plays in North America. And what that provides for us is a large set of inventory at high quality, and we're pretty lucky to have that. The last point on this slide, and really the one that's relevant to this conference and this discussion, is that Encana has expertise and specializes in horizontal well drilling and specializes in cube development. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more here in a few slides. So Encana, in our position here in the Uinta Basin, and some key numbers to throw out there, we have 300 employees here in the field. We have 1,500 producing wells in the basin. We've got over 200,000 acres net, and we're forecasted to produce over 19,000 barrels equivalent this year in 2019. So we've got a material position here in the basin for sure. We believe, just like what others have said here in the conference already, that there is a significant resource potential under our footprint or under our acreage. We have historically tested this in the past with Newfield going to Encana. We've tested 8 horizons already over the past years. And in part of our acreage, we actually believe there's over 2,000 foot of oil saturation interval. So we think it's stacked. We've tested some of that stack, and we see that their potential is certainly there. You might have heard or might have seen that recently we've dropped our rig out of the basin. And so we're going to be on a pause on the drilling side, but we are going to be active in terms of our completions. So we have 3 completions left here in the basin this year. What we're doing with our opportunity on the pause is that we're going to take the time to look at the investments we've made in the basin for all these years, all the data we've collected, the investments been made, and really understand the data that's coming in with that. We're also going to take, with the new organization in Encana, and their successes and their experiences and skills working in the Permian and Montney and their cube development, and bring those learnings into the basin. And we're going to combine learnings from Newfield Historic and all the learnings and development styles that have been working with Encana now, and blend that together and really try to come up with what might be the opportunity set for cube development here in the future in the Uinta Basin. I'll talk more about that in a bit. The last bullet on the slide is an important one. We are committed to the community here in the Uinta Basin. Historically, Newfield has been committed over time, and that doesn't change with Encana. We're committed in providing, investments here this year, but really it goes to the field. The 300 employees that we have here are always been engaged and always involved in community outreach and doing a lot for the basin. We'll go on to the next slide. And this covers basically our accomplishments in horizontal drilling in the basin. What you'll see on the screen is a cross-section view, or kind of like a side view, if you will, of just a theoretical horizontal well, right? And you got a lot of content and bullets on the left-hand side of the slide. Let me first kind of just introduce horizontal drilling. I think most people know it, but for those who don't, it's basically the act of drilling 2 miles down and then drilling laterally 2 miles. A pretty simple concept. It's important in terms of how that relates to cube development, which I'm going to get into a bit. But in terms of what we've done in the past, we started drilling horizontally in the basin in 2010. So we've got just shy of 10 years of experience drilling horizontal wells in the basin. And with that comes a lot of experience and know-how and a lot of improvements over time. We were the first operator to drill an SXL well, which is termed a long lateral or 10,000-foot lateral. And we did that in 2013. And I think the last bullet is something that we're real happy with, and that is over time we've been doing a lot with the Division of Oil and Gas Minerals to collaborate in terms of what we wanted to put out there in terms of laterals, horizontals, spacing, density, and there's been a lot of collaboration back and forth between our company and the division. Why do we want to do horizontals? Why do we prefer that style of development? Well, there's a couple things here listed on the slide, but there's 3 points to make here. It obviously, we believe it brings increased recovery factor, recovery to the resource that's sitting underneath our position. That's one. Second is it has a lot less surface footprint, and that's a big benefit in many ways between the surface owners and the operators and the environment. But third, ties into cube development. And that's where the schematic here helps, because with laterals, we have the ability to stack up horizontals in different formations in the same area and do that all at one time in a cube. So it's important for our ability to do cube development, and it's important for recovery, and it's important for surface footprint. Well, that takes us to what does cube development mean for Encana, and what are we considering here for the Uinta Basin? Again, we got another kind of a block diagram sitting on the slide on the right, a visual. And on the block diagram, you'll see that there are 3 rigs sitting on top of the block in different colors, gray, purple, and then kind of a blue. Down below in that cube, you'll see represented wells that are coming out of the block. So you'll see there's a series of wells coming out underneath the gray rig, a series of wells coming out of the purple rig, and some out of the teal or blue rig. Each one of those colors represents what we would term a cube. So when you see, like an example, in the middle of that block diagram, there's a whole series of purple wells coming out of the block. They're all going to be drilled from one surface location, and that's represented by the purple rig. So that purple assortment of wells is one cube, and then the color and the wells that you have to one side and the other are different cubes. So that's what we mean by geographically, what is a cube? Well, the cubes for Encana, the driver there is that it maximizes our resource value and it delivers increased efficiency. The characteristics of a cube for Encana are the following bullets. Yeah, again, it's the ability to drill horizontal wells, multiple horizontal wells from one surface. It's the ability to drill all of these horizontal wells and complete them at one time. And that's what that schematic is basically showing. All the purple wells in that one cube would be then drilled and completed at the same time. It would be, we want to do advanced completions when we do a cube development. Advanced completions for us is a way that we can focus our energy and our completions centered around the wells in the cube to be more efficiently recovering the reserves. We do detailed planning with our cubes, meaning with the 8 wells like you would see in this block, or any wells that we'd want to do off of one cube, we would plan that ahead of time and have the opportunity to save money, have efficiency by planning ahead instead of just doing single well, single well, single well. It also allows us to have learning. So let's say we drill the purple cube first, and we learn about something on the drilling side or the completion side. We would apply those learnings then to the next cube and the next cube and the next cube. And there's a host of other above ground and below ground benefits. This is what has been successful for Encana in terms of in the Permian, in the Montney. And those successes are what we're going to try to understand here in the near future, understand what data we've collected and what we've seen already in the Uinta Basin, and see what that could mean for potential for cube development in this basin. We do cube development again in the areas of Permian, Montney, and Anadarko. We're excited to understand our capabilities of doing that here in the Uinta Basin. And that's all I've got on my slides. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to present today in front of you.
Hi, everyone. As mentioned earlier, I'm John Cola. I'm the manager of operations at Crescent Point Energy, and I'm pleased to be invited here today to talk about what Crescent Point's doing in the Uinta Basin and where we've come and where we're planning to grow here in the future. So first off, kind of give you a little overview of the entire company before we just dive into the Uinta Basin. As you can see, Crescent Point Energy is a Canadian-based company. Our head office is in Calgary, with our U.S.-based office based out of Denver. In the U.S., we also have field offices right in Roosevelt here in the Uinta Basin, as well as in Williston, North Dakota. Corporately, our company is focusing on three main areas. The first one being the Williston Basin, which a lot of that 112,000 barrels of oil equivalent a day comes from Canada, but we also have about 22,000 barrels of production out of North Dakota. The second largest core area is southwest Saskatchewan, where we're producing about 40,000 barrels of oil equivalent a day. And last but not least is the Uinta Basin, where we currently have about 21,000 barrels of oil per day. So these three core areas make up 95% of our production. These are the areas that we're focusing most of our budget in and looking to grow. As you can see, just kind of comparing our business plan this year compared to last year, we're planning to spend $112 million in the Uinta Basin. Most of that's going to be spent drilling 12 horizontal wells. Compared to last year, we drilled 23 horizontal wells, as we have cut back our budget significantly from 2019 compared to 2018. In the Uinta Basin, we reduced from 20% of our corporate budget down to about 12%. Overall, our budget for 2019 is about 1.2 to 1.3 billion, compared to a 1.74 billion Canadian that we spent last year. Looking at our corporate production here, you can kind of see the Uinta Basin makes up 11% of our total production. That's around 180,000 barrels per day, which kind of matches what we're getting with our budget targets of 12% of our corporate budget. So this next slide here, I just kind of want to show you kind of a geological cross-section of Uinta and other shale plays that Crescent Point and other companies are focusing on. If you start over at the right looking at the Bakken, you can see we have the Bakken and Three Forks formations that all hold about 10 to 20 million barrels per section. If you kind of move your way from left to right, you can kind of see that the strap play that companies are focusing increases, as well as typically the amount of oil in place. And moving over to Uinta, you can see that the length of the stack plays Uinta Basin actually rivals the Midland Permian Basin. Here we got about 20 to 60 million barrels per section, and estimating about 55 million of barrels of oil in place that we can go after and tap. Keyed in on some of these stats here, you can see, as was shown earlier, 285 horizontal wells in the Uinta Basin, but currently the activity level is only 7 rigs. Comparing that to the Midland, I mean, they got over 15,000 wells and about 470 rigs joined right now. So it just kind of gives you some perspective on the Uinta Basin, on how few amount of horizontals are present here and how much opportunity is here to grow, when you compare it to these other basins. So here, if you kind of look over on the right, you can kind of see just a geological kind of cross-section of all the formations we're targeting, starting with the mahogany at the top that we've seen earlier, moving our way down to the Wasatch. And the interesting point to really focus on here is surface impact. You can see from one horizontal pad, you'd have the ability to drill multiple horizontals in all these different formations and drain all those reserves through the section. If you look over at a vertical well, you have the same vertical footprint, but really all that well is going to do is drain from one or maybe multiple benches that you would complete in. So the amount of impact to surface is huge, and that's why we're really excited about horizontal drilling. The three zones that Crescent Point is kind of really focusing on and developing going forward are the Castle Peak, Uteland Butte, and Upper Wasatch. And that extends to be about a 1,000-foot interval that we're focusing on in our completions. Over these last few years, we've done a lot in terms of understanding our vertical barriers and how critical they are to our development. To properly drain the reserves in each of these, we want to understand where our fracs are growing, what potential redraining, and then how many horizontals we need to place through these. We've done a lot of different science over the past few years, and I'll talk about a little bit of that sooner. Overall completion designs, have varied. In our 2-mile wells, we're currently doing about 1,200 to 2,400 pounds per foot. We've made a lot of strides in our fluid design. We used to pump a lot more water and go with a high viscous crosslink frac, where now we're transitioning to, a slick water frac with friction reducers that can allow us to place, similar amounts of proppant with less water. On the drilling side, we've had a lot of learnings over the past 4 or 5 years as well. We've pad drilling has definitely cut down our drilling costs. We've thought of different trials with drilling fluids, and finding with oil-based mud we can drill wells quicker and get them the best results in terms of lubricity through the well. We've used rotary steerable systems. We've had a lot of different bit trials. So we're at a point now where we're going into development phase. We're really comfortable about how we can drill our wells and how we can keep our costs down. The third aspect to talk about here would be marketing. Obviously the refining in the basin is kind of at its capacity, and the one thing, we want to look forward to the future here is future opportunities, whether that be more around the Salt Lake area or even locally, to allow us to grow. Railing is something too that we think could definitely help us have some growth in the basin as well. We were railing crude back in 2014 when obviously we had higher oil prices and the differentials would allow us to do so, but in this current pricing environment, railing isn't really competitive with some of our other plays. So that's something we really want to work on. And thirdly, if we could find some other market for our waxy Uinta crude that we could fill up locally, that would help as well. So here I just want to kind of give you a little overview of our position in the Uinta Basin. The yellow marking on the lap is Crescent Point's current position in the Uinta Basin. And you can also see, kind of our proximity to Roosevelt and Duchesne. Out of all the horizontals drilled, February 2019, IHS data is marking 214 of those to be oil wells, and Crescent Point's drilled 67 of them. Throughout the horizontals we've drilled, we've tested 6 unique formations, and you can kind of see them over on the right there. It kind of breaks down started at the top, the Douglas Creek, we've drilled 3 horizontals, 2 in the Black Shale, 34 in the Castle Peak, 7 in the Utland Butte, and 21 in both the upper and lower Wasatch. So this slide here is a pretty interesting one, and some key points to look at here is just how the production of horizontal wells have increased, over the years. You can see from like 2012 to 2014, a lot of wells that were completed, have in the first 3 years under 250,000 barrels of oil a day. Well, we know now in our current oil environment, if that's the production we were getting, we wouldn't be drilling any wells here. We need to have better results. And you can see kind of the evolution here, looking from 27 to 2019. A lot of the wells are cuming 350,000 or even more than 400,000 barrels in a year and a half to 2 years. So it's a lot of this, I think, can be attributed to, obviously the geological understanding. We've been at a point now where, we've done a lot of microseismic, 4D seismic, through the learnings where we drilled and delineated the play. We now know where we want to drill, and that's helping us get these results. As well, I put a lot of that too on completion technologies too. The changes we made in technology and the larger frac intensity we've done have helped contribute to these better well results that, Crescent Point and other operators are seeing in the basin. So here, I just want to give you kind of a little overview of what, Crescent Point's cube development is in the Uinta Basin. So if you could kind of just imagine here, go down approximately 8,500 feet, and from there, you're looking at about 1,000 vertical depth, and then imagine this cube spread over, a section. What we're planning to do here in our current development plan is move forward and develop what we're calling a cube wine rack spacing that can allow us to, develop the Wasatch, Utland Butte, as well as the Castle Peak. To get to this point, we've done some spacing trials. The vertical spacing trial you can see is kind of shown in the red dots, where we've, drilled and completed a Castle Peak stacked over Utland Butte and Wasatch. We have about 330 feet between each of these formations. This was done about a year and a half ago, and we're really pleased with the results we have. Some other tests we've done as well regarding the horizontal spacing. If we know vertically that we can, complete the Castle Peak, Utland Butte, and Wasatch, how many wells per section can we, fit into this cube? So in terms of some density tests, back in 2017, we did one on the Castle Peak. We've done a 4 and 8 well per section test. Early 2018, we did a 4 well per section test in the upper Wasatch. And more recently, we've done 2 4 well per section density tests in the Wasatch, deeper Wasatch. The tests in the Castle Peak and Upper Wasatch were both on 1 mile horizontals, where the 2 in the Wasatch were done most recently were 2 miles. Again, science, how I mentioned earlier, we've performed microseismic on 9 wells. Oil, water, and proppant tracers have been pumped on probably 20 to 30 wells. A lot of them kind of really confirmed through our vertical and horizontal spacing tests that, we are actually communicating to these wells, getting an idea of where we're seeing that interaction. Also with offsetting parent wells, whether they be horizontal, and some cases even vertical wells, we were able to determine the lengths of our fracs, which has really, helped us plan our development program going forward. We've also, in the past 4 to 5 years, acquired 5,000 feet of core and 10 wells, which has really, helped not only our geologists understand more about the rock from their routine analysis on, permeability, porosity, as well as oil saturations, but also we've done advanced rock mechanics to determine the strength of our barriers, which we've incorporated into our frac modeling to help us determine what kind of growth we're getting from our fracs. And from the drilling aspect as well, we've also done a lot of work with core. We've done a lot of fluid compatibility testing with our drilling fluids, as well as used the core in terms of our bit selection. So going forward here, questions we still want to work on, decide ultimately how many wells per section do we want? Is it 4, 6, or 8? Maybe from our first test, we were seeing 8 maybe too much. Is 4 not enough? I think it's going to really take us some time to understand this in our cube development and our plays that we're going after now. Vertical interference between zones, definitely we've seen that in some of our tracers, but in some cases it's not really shown to have a negative effect on production. So we kind of need some more time to understand that. And then going forward, what zones are next to test? Is it going to be more Douglas Creek, Black Shale, potentially other benches in the Green River? To be determined. So that's about all I guess kind of to close here, I just want to affirm, Crescent Point's commitment to the basin. Since 2012, when we entered the basin with the acquisition of U Energy, we've kept an active program, even that extended even through the downturn in 2015 and 2016. Currently, we have a 2-rig program showing here that's in development mode. We're fully developing this cube play I just showed you on the last page. In each of these rigs are drilling 2 Wasatch and 2 Ludlum and Bells. So we're kind of developing, half of that cube development. That's kind of what we're focusing now. Just how much in this cube can be developed now, get in production sooner, confirm what we've done in terms of our drilling completion, see what the results are, and then take those learnings, to future cube development, as well as, completing the 12 wells to develop within that cube. In case of drilling activity and marketing challenges, we've obviously looked through done some analysis to determine, if we had no marketing concerns or if rail differentials were the same, how many wells would be drilled here? And, in some cases, we're thinking 3 or 4 rig program could definitely be viable. It's just, we're always kind of evaluating what the basin production is and really what are our limitations there. So I guess kind of to close up here, I'd just like to thank everyone in this room and the Uinta Basin who makes this possible, the Ute Tribe, Energy and Minerals, DOG and BLM, BLA, and other agencies, and all our field staff that, our staff here in Denver rely on to work hard to keep things working for us. Thank you.
Can I get back to your comparison between it's the second slide? Can I just have some fun with that?
So this one here? Yeah.
I know there's a lot of people in the audience that aren't from the oil and gas industry, and I thought I'd take this slide and just try to put a little bit into perspective. And it's very early in the development of this field to make definitive numbers. We've asked the companies to kind of give us their best estimate of reserves. So if you'll look on this, you'll see that the entire Uinta Basin pool equates to 55 billion barrels of original oil in place. Of that original oil in place, about 10% is recovered. With the recovery factor we're seeing at this stage, early as the board is seeing from the expert witnesses that come before us, about 10%. So it looks like you're going to, about 5.5. Again, this is early. These numbers can be refined over time. But if you take 5.5 billion barrels, you multiply that times $50 a barrel, and then if you assume the state's tax burden, fees, from all sources, from county, city, state, whatever, of about 10%, what does that number mean then in terms of what the state government would get over time at $50 a barrel? The caveat is we don't know how fast that's going to be produced, and that'll be one of the follow-up questions I'm going to ask. But if you take 55 times 10% recovery factor times $50 a barrel times 10% taxes and fees, that's about $27.5 billion that the state will get. This is a game changer. Problem we got, we're going to talk about the markets in a little bit, but this is a serious play. There's a lot of oil under each square mile, and we're excited to see this thing go forward. So, John, thank you very much.
So thank you all for inviting me, and I'm honored to be here to give a little bit of information about our company, Finley Resources. This is the first time we've been on a panel like this, so I might go a little bit into some details that'll give you a little bit about our company culture and how we think about the basin and that kind of stuff. So Finley Resources is a company that we started in 1997. And I got out of school in 1979, got in the oil business right after that. So you can obviously tell from those dates that I'm one of the young guys up here, right? So Finley Resources started in 1997. The business model is one of acquisition of highly developed producing weighted properties. So we in the early part of our career, we bought a lot of properties that somebody else had drilled. We took them over, tried to improve them, drill new wells on them, and that kind of stuff. So we've ended up with properties in 7 states as a result of that. And we're going through some realignment, trying to refocus our assets really in 4 different core areas. And that's going to be Utah, Permian, Powder River Basin, and the Scoop and Stack. And we have about 100,000 acres, of which 66,000 acres of that is here in the Uinta Basin. But a little bit about the company. I own 85% of the company, and there's 4 other gentlemen that are in the management team that own the other 15%. We have plain vanilla bank debt. We don't have any investors at all, so we do this with our own cash flow, and if the banks are nice to us, we get to borrow a little money every now and then. So we're private. We don't have to report to some shareholders. I can be a little bit politically incorrect because of that. And so if you want to ask me some of those kinds of questions, I'll be happy to give you my opinion. We have drilled horizontal wells in Texas in the Barnett Shale. We've drilled horizontal wells in Wyoming and horizontal wells in the Scoop and Stack in Oklahoma. We do plan to start a horizontal program here in June, July, depending on some of the rig availability. Our budget here is going to be about $115 million in vertical wells, and then the horizontal program will be incremental above that this year. We've had a horizontal rig working in the Uinta Basin since October of 16, and since that period of time, we've drilled over 100 wells. And in total, we've drilled over 200 wells in the basin. We operate about 700 or 800 wells here now. We have 50 employees here in the basin, 100 employees in Fort Worth, and then we have small offices in Oklahoma and in the Permian Basin as well. We have about 10,000 barrels a day of production. It's mostly black wax because we've been doing vertical drilling in the Green River, and that seems to be a good niche for us. We feel like we're the most efficient operator of wells, vertical wells, and it's easy to say that because I think we're the only one drilling them right now. So that gives us a heads up on that. Let's see here. We also have a rail terminal in Helper, Utah. So crude by rail is going to be a component of our growth. We feel like that in order to make the basin viable for repeatable, sustainable drilling programs, we've got to have that. So the wide variation in differentials that we've experienced, even in the last 6 months, has been significant. In our company, we've sold oil at -22 to WTI to as little as $1.59 in the last 6 months. So it's hard to plan, hard to budget with that kind of variation in our revenue stream. So we want to try to be part of the solution to solve that. From a culture standpoint, because we're private, it's nice that we don't have the burdens of public reporting and the cost that's associated with that. So part of our thought process there is some of that money we want to reinvest in our people. So in order to have great assets, you got to have great people. And so every employee here in the Uinta Basin knows my wife, knows the wives of most of our top managers in Fort Worth. We travel here. We have a real desire to create a close-knit group of people that have teamwork and the greater good is part of our culture. And that's important to us. And because of that, we feel like we have the best compensation, best bonus system of any of the producers here in the basin, and we're proud of that. We also take our relationship with the Ute Indian tribe and Utero very seriously. We value the relationship with the tribe and with Utero, and acknowledge those contractual obligations, and we try to make sure that we uphold those and that we're part of the solution, and making sure that we can work with the tribe to benefit the tribe and ourselves, as that's an important part of being an operator in the basin. I think one thing we haven't done as well as I want to do, and as part of our goals for this year, is more community outreach. Because we're private, we seem to run under the radar quite a bit. So we're going to be seeking out some opportunities in the community to give back more than we have. I think that's something that we haven't done a good job at. And of course, it's also a keen part of our culture in terms of how we plan our locations and how we want to operate long-term, and that's the environmental impact that we're having. So we're keen about looking forward, making sure that we're equipping our wells with the best equipment long-term. The idea that we're going to own these assets for the long term gives us kind of a direction of how we want to equip the wells and operate them over a period of time. And the environmental component is certainly a big part of that. So I think that's it. We're here to stay. We're long-term, and hopefully, being private, we can do things a little bit differently and for everybody's benefit. So thank you all for allowing me to be here. Appreciate it.
Well, good morning. My name is Earl Norris, and I'm the president and CEO of Bear Lake Resources. And you go, who is Bear Lake Resources? Well, Bear Lake Resources is a little startup company. We're in Heber City, Utah. It's on the other side of the mountains. Right now, it's just me and my daughter, Tara. She's our landman, I'm the geologist. We're looking for acquisitions, and these guys write the big checks, I write the little checks. But we're really excited about the Uinta Basin. We're glad to be here. We like Utah. We have family in Utah, but we have worked in many other basins in the U.S. for lots of different companies. This is my third startup that I've done. Also worked for BP Amoco, Southwestern Energy, lots and lots of the bigger companies. So this isn't our first rodeo. And like Rulon said, you know, he's got the four-star generals and the young guns. I've been doing this for 39 years, so I guess I'm like Jim, I'm one of the young guns. So, so the basin, we love the Uinta Basin, and you guys know quite a bit about it already. There's the slide that John put up there. There was 55 billion barrels of oil in place. I have 30 on mine. There's a lot of stacked pays in the basin, and the Crescent Point slide that showed all the different stratigraphic columns and all the different pays in all these different basins. The only basin that has more pays, more stacked pays than Uinta is the Permian Basin. Everybody knows about the Permian Basin, one of the best petroleum basins in the world. The Uinta Basin has at least 10 different pay zones. And the horizontal plays right now are going on in at least 4 of these pays, and there's a lot more that we're going to be testing here in the future, and some of these guys are testing them now. The really good economics, it's low risk, repeatable. There's lots of horizontal potential left and a lot of vertical potential left. And as we heard earlier from Bill and Dr. McLennan, they did a great job as a geophysicist and a reservoir engineer talking about the geology. And I always, everywhere I go, I say it's all about the rocks. And these guys talked about it being about the rocks, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So what makes the Uinta Basin special? Well, there's lots and lots of oil here. And everybody's probably seen a slide like this. You know where Bluebell Altamont is, the horizontal fairway, Monument Buttes, Natra Buttes, Red Wash, and Brundage Canyon. Those are some of the great fields around here. You know, as we talked about earlier, the rocks in this basin are different than anywhere else in the world. And that's because they were deposited in an organically rich lake, Lake Uinta. And this cross-section shows it's from south to north, and it shows a cross-section, geologic cross-section through the basin. As you go deeper, as you go north in the basin, the rocks get deeper and deeper and deeper. In Bluebell Altamont, we're producing there from 10,000 feet down to 17,000 feet. Great reservoirs, it's an older field. What we're concentrating on right now in the basin are horizontal wells, and as we talked about, the Wasatch and Green River are really good horizontal reservoirs. This oval is kind of a unique to this basin. And this oval contains oil-saturated rocks. And so we have oil-saturated rocks in the Uinta Basin from the bottom to the top. And that's what this oval means. And you think, well, do we really have oil all the way from the bottom to the top? We do. Everybody's heard about oil shale, oil sands. They crop out on the surface. Bluebell Altamont, we got oil to 16 to 17,000 feet. This is pretty unique. This is one of the few basins in the world where that occurs. The horizontal play. Like we've heard, about 285 wells, horizontal wells that have been drilled. This is a map showing the different areas. You can see that blue over there on the left side is Starvation Reservoir. The brown areas is where Crescent Point is operating. The green is where Newfield in Canna is operating. The blue, as many of you know, is where Axia operates there on the far north of the horizontal fairway. And then EP Energy has recently drilled some really nice wells over right close to here in Duchesne, just a little bit north of town. So what's the future of horizontal drilling in the Uinta Basin? So this map shows Again, it's the same as the one before, except the different colored blocks show all the areas that have been spaced for horizontal drilling in the Uinta Basin. And so most of the area north of Monument Butte's been spaced for horizontal drilling. So that's what's to come in the future. I think all this area will be drilled horizontally. So we're going to go from 285 wells, 10, 20, or 30 times that many of horizontal wells. We have spaced it on 640 acres and 1,280 acre spacing. So we can drill a mile laterals or we can drill 2 mile laterals. So like we've talked about, the Castle Peak, the Ludlum Butte, and the Wasatch are our main reservoirs. We're drilling horizontal wells right now. Up above there, we have the Garden Grove, we have the Douglas Creek. All those are going to be drilled horizontally along with these four. We're also going to be drilling some more Wasatch zones. So there's lots and lots of reservoirs in this basin, so the future's really bright. So this map shows what I think is going to be the play extent of the Ludlum Butte. Ludlum Butte is what we talked about earlier, is really the first horizontal play that's been developed. And so this is about what I think the area of where it's going to be developed. Some of the guys in the room their opinion may differ on how big this area is going to be, but the Ludlum Butte's a repeatable formation where we're going to find lots and lots of oil. So I don't know if you can see this very well, but in column G, I have some expected ultimate recoveries. And I put these numbers up here on some of the really good wells that have been drilled in the last 2 or 3 years. And the reason I put these up here is to show that we have expected ultimate recoveries from 600,000 barrels up to 1.3 million barrels. And that's what my reservoir engineer has told me that these reserves are going to be on these wells. And those are world-class numbers. These compare to the Stack and the Scoop and the Permian. So these are really, really good numbers. So also, many of you have worked in the basin a long, long time and aware of the Bluebell Altamont field, drilled in the 70s and 80s. It's a sort of a forgotten giant. And that blue area shows where Bluebell Altamont, it's sort of forgotten, but there's a lot of oil in place. So it has a bright future ahead of it. And so, as I said before, it's all about the rocks. I'm a geologist. I love the rocks. I love the fossils. And the Uinta Basin has great rocks, and they're saturated with oil. And that's what makes this basin different than any other basin. So that's my presentation. I appreciate your time today, and thanks for coming.
We're out of time, but if you will, we've had a great group here. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have. Will you join me again for the whole group and give them a big hand? We're out of time for the questions, but I think they answered all the questions I was going to ask, so it worked out just perfectly. So, John, we'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Rulon. Appreciate that. We're now going to have a presentation from the Utah Division of Emergency Management. There, Mr. Matt Boudreau. Did I get that right?
Close enough. That's a good Louisiana name. There's a lot of petroleum going on down there.
Okay.
It's good enough.
Let me get your presentation up here. There you go. Sorry for the delay. Here you go.
That's all right. Thank you, sir. Great. Good morning, everyone. First off, I'd like to thank those that got me up here today, and thank you for sitting here and listening to what the information I want to share with you this morning. So on my drive out here this morning, thinking about you as my audience and what I want to talk about, it took me back to my childhood. In 1965, I was in the first grade, so I'm kind of in that special club that was up here earlier. The bottom end of it, maybe. And during the Christmas break, my father moved our family, me and my 3 siblings and my mom, moved us up to the Kenai Peninsula, where maybe half a dozen or more years before, the Swanson River oil field had been discovered in the north end of the peninsula. And then later on, natural gas was discovered in proximity to that. And my father didn't take a job in the oil field industry. He was in a service-related industry. And this was still just a rapidly developing thing, and especially in the wilds of Alaska, back in that era. It was a very interesting time. Okay, and I'll come clean. He ran a bar, okay? But it was a critical service. So actually, he ran a combination facility, as we call it today, a multi-purpose facility. 3 stories, and in the walk-in basement was a bar and a restaurant where an oil field worker could just damn near get everything they needed. Steak and potatoes. I think they had a salad bar one day and they got thrown out. Then there was 2 floors above that had a total of 8 rooms for rent. And as you can imagine, as we experience even today in rapidly developing areas, housing is difficult to get, quite a challenge. It was interesting to me as a child hanging around that place, we'd go visit Dad at work and such, that I didn't see a lot of men staying there, but there was another service industry that was renting those rooms out, kind of on the half-hour by hourly basis. And so, service industry was a big deal up there, and we were all part of it. And so I think back to how that industry developed, and of course, those fields developed. They were putting platforms, drilling platforms out in Cook Inlet. Then, of course, in my mid-teens, the first stick of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline was laid. And so all of my formative years, I grew up in this industry, and I have a great appreciation for what you do, the challenges that you're up against, the good people that work in this industry. And I just want to say that I'm here today to talk about those challenges that you're up against. But thanks for the walk down memory lane on the drive out here from Salt Lake City today. So I have an R word in my industry, in emergency management and public safety, and it's not regulatory. It's resilience. And so I'll use that word a lot, and I want you to remember that word because, again, in my industry, we talk a lot about we're going to protect, we're going to prevent bad things, we're going to mitigate hazards, we're going to respond when needed, we're going to help recovery and get people back on their feet. And that's just unrealistic to totally protect and prevent bad things from happening. And you get that, you're experiencing that in your work and in your personal lives. So I'm going to use the word resilience quite a bit. So when I talk about critical infrastructure resilience, these are some of the underpinnings of it, all right? It's all about adapting to change. And you're going to hear me use the word threatscape a lot. And man, isn't the threatscape that you're faced with changing. I herald back to my childhood days in the petroleum industry and what they were up against. And, there's probably not a lot of differences other than they were spinning valves by hand back then. Now a lot of your, industrial control systems, SCADA, if you're connected to the internet, you're vulnerable. That's a way big wrinkle. It's more than a wrinkle. It's a tidal wave in the threatscape, okay? So we look at an all hazards perspective in my office, and that's natural hazards, of course, and in Alaska it was earthquakes, seismic activity, and maybe severe winter weather and the occasional flood. But then we also look at technological hazards, simply things like power outages. Can't get on the internet. Those technology disruptions. And then, of course, there's the man-made threat, and we think active threat, shooters, rammings, bombings, and the malicious cyber actors. And that's, again, where you're very vulnerable because you're virtually operating some of your critical operations. So we take an all hazards perspective when we interface with critical infrastructure owners and operators like you here today. Again, non-regulatory approach, and it's all about your community and whole community resilience. Because the people that work out here, live out here, play out here, earn your money out here, you spend it out here. And if your paycheck is disrupted, what happens to your communities? They'll start to fail, all right? We see it around the world and throughout time over and over and over. So it's all about quality of life, quality of community, and safety of all that. So it involves a lot of interaction, right, between industry partners. As we've witnessed today, a lot of people talking good things, and there's a lot of good things happening in public-private partnerships, and that's what my group is all about. We're here to help you reduce your exposure to risk, okay, and the things that are causing you those risks, those disruptions, and the consequences, the dominoes that fall. And so our goal is to make introductions, get relevant parties together, facilitate dialogue on the resilience topic, and then build those public-private partnerships. That's the P3 up there, okay, at all the levels. So in my industry, we look at the world in 16 slices. There's the 16 sectors of industry as we kind of categorize them. But there are a couple that rise to the top. Let me go back here for a minute. Oh, there we go. There's 4 that stand out above the others if you look at that matrix. And that has got to be water and wastewater. Water is life. Transportation, very simply in your industry, you got to get that oil down the road somehow, if nothing else. Communications, again, we rely on modern technology and all that it affords us. And then ultimately your sector, the energy sector in red, whether that's electricity, whether that's natural gas, whether that's raw petroleum, refined petroleum, whatever that may be. The rest of those sectors, they don't work without what the 4 of you do. And I think you can see that pretty easily. So when we talk about addressing the all hazards threatscape, it's all about meeting you where you're at and understanding what your concerns are. And here's our scientific aspect on it. This is the risk equation in its simplest form. So if R is your outcome of your risk posture when it comes to resilience against whether natural or technological or man-made hazards or disasters, there's 3 factors in play there. Consequence factored times your vulnerability to what you're up against, those 3 broad strokes I talked about, and then the threats, the vulnerability and the threats, okay? That is your risk equation. As you can quickly guess, you don't have to have a math degree to figure out you want a very low score, as low a score as you can possibly achieve in your resilience. We do that by assigning members of our team to be sector-specific liaisons so that they get to know you. I'm your sector's liaison, by the way, okay? And I'll put my contact information up at the end. I hope you'll get in touch with me. It starts with opportunities like this. We just get to know each other. I tell you what I'm about. You start to trust me. We start to tell you what we can do. We can provide site security assessments, cybersecurity assessments via our partnerships with the Department of Homeland Security. They're free. They're your taxpayer dollars at work. You own the outcomes of those assessments. They're protected by a federal law called the Protected Critical Infrastructure Information Act, PCII, that was passed by Congress in 2002, and it affords you some critical protections in your sharing of sometimes sensitive information with us as we work with you to build more resilience in your critical operations. It prohibits the outcomes of our assessments and our findings back to you from any grandma or sunshine laws. It prohibits any subpoenas in civil litigation that you might receive for the outcomes of our assessments. And it holds our feet to the fire in the strongest way to be federally prosecuted if we violate the handling of your protected information. So I just want you to know that about assessments. And again, resilience, not regulatory, okay? The organic spin-offs from those findings and those assessments, and I perform it with my partner from the Department of Homeland Security, and there's one protective security advisor for DHS here. There's also one cybersecurity advisor that focus on site security and cybersecurity respectively. I bring them at your request only. And again, organically, we spin off into these conversations about where are your gaps in your resilience posture. How can we bring your taxpayer dollar resources from the feds, from the state, and build partnerships throughout all that strata of federal, state, and local public sector with you, the private sector, to start filling those gaps. So we train together, we practice via exercises, whether it's conversation-based exercises and maybe functional out in the field. And then when we can, when necessary, we provide incident support. Think your wildfire season. And by the way, anyone involved in helping each other with that was fantastic. Took me back to my days on the Kenai when we'd have big wildfires and communities pull together, industry pulls together, and that is the constant feedback I've gotten from everyone I talk with since last year's wildfire season, by the way. So thank you for that. We also help you with planning, and we can tie you in, and I'm going to today, to some very relevant information streams. Things like ONG ISAC, which many of you are probably familiar with, I'm guessing, okay? Oil and Natural Gas Information Sharing and Analysis Center. In the modern threatscape, these are gathering points of critical threat information that are unclassified, but for official use only. You join that as a member, and you start to get those information streams, and I'll turn you on to some other great information streams free via DHS here shortly. But to the right there, you see the complete preparedness cycle, the POTI cycle, as I call it. So plan, we organize, we train, maybe we have to buy equipment if necessary to work together. We train, we practice it, we figure out what was the outcome, and then we start over on the next gaps. Okay, so there's the preparedness cycle ad nauseum, and that's the simple recipe of our interaction between public and private sectors. So in these P3s that I'm talking about, we have partnerships with significant federal agencies, and you can see them reflected there. Our biggest partner is the Department of Homeland Security, and my peer, whose name is Mark Lemery, by the way, and Rick Gardner on the cyber side. Our role with Department of Energy, my role is really simple, and Annie and I have this shared responsibility. Annie, does everybody know who you are? Say hi to Annie, because likely, unless you're a refinery or a pipeline, you may not hear from us. But we are Utah's representatives back to DOE in the role of Energy Emergency Assurance Coordinators, okay, EEACs. And basically, they just ping us when there's a problem. They want to know what's the sit rep down in Utah. What's going on down there that's causing prices to spike in the Northwest now because your refineries aren't up to capacity, and the big earthquake comes, how soon are you going to get back online, things like that. We also work with a handful of state agencies in the public safety realm, okay, and those are some of them reflected there. And of course, your host today, Governor's Office of Energy Development. And then we have some other partnerships that we have with other groups, the universities and such, that help us with the latest research on resilience and safety planning. Now, those are all great partnerships, but for me, where the rubber really hits the road is with the private sector. So to take action on the need to communicate between public and private sector on all these topics of planning and preparedness and response and recovery, we formed an initial group along the Wasatch Front called the Lifeline Infrastructures Resilience Council. So government's got to have its acronyms, and that's called the LIRC, the L-I-R-C. So we lurk around on the Wasatch Front 3 or 4 times a year. We get together, and it's, again, those 4 lifeline sectors that I mentioned. So let's start with the energy partners. Those are the significant players that attend our LIRC meetings, okay? And then we move into some of the other sectors, transportation, you get the idea, there's some of your comms, and then lastly, the water. The good news is we've just formed a LIRC out here in the basin. We had our first meeting in December, and if you're interested in joining, I'm gonna have my email address up at the end of this presentation. I'd like for you to contact me, and it's for the lifeline sectors, and I would also invite the service industries that are essential to the lifeline sectors, especially the energy sector out here, okay? These are the players that signed up and attended the first meeting, so you can get a good snapshot that we've got, again, great representation from the utility companies and those suppliers that make products and services that are essential to our communities, and of course, healthcare. That's like number 4.5 of the 4 lifeline sectors. And here's what we do in the LIRC. Initially, it's all about getting to know each other, like I said. In the Wasatch Front LIRC, we spent probably the first year, each entity at a time, standing in front of the room at a meeting, and just, for example, then Questar, now Dominion, said, here's us from wellhead to burner tip in your basement on your hot water heater, at every step in between. And then tied that, most importantly, into, and how do we, as the natural gas supplier to 85% of the state, rely on the other 3 lifeline sectors in the room today? Well, that's a no-brainer. They've got to have electricity to run their compressor stations, to run their ops centers. You can see the connections. So then we talk about interdependencies as the relationship goes into the 2nd or 3rd year, and then it just organically unfolds. I've had meetings end, and you'll have 3 people grab each other in sidebar in the corner of the room, and I overheard one guy say one day, he says, dude, you just changed 6 pages in my emergency action plan for the better. You just tightened our ship. You just upped our game when it comes to being more resilient because of what you explained to us today. And it's not going to be any different out here in your Uinta Basin LIRC, okay? So it's an opportunity to connect you, the owner and operator, with your local public safety officials. EMs, those are emergency managers. Law enforcement, obviously. And then it just starts that dialogue, that information sharing between the sectors and between the entities, and it's so meaningful. I don't have the time, but I could share more anecdotes, but I won't. You'll see SARS reporting, and I'm gonna linger on that here in a minute shortly. Suspicious Activity Reporting System. So we talk about the threatscape. You know, we're all up against those common threats, whether we're businesses, whether we're individuals in our homes and personal lives, okay? And one of the things we ask you as public safety authorities is we need your help in understanding just what you're up against. So I'm gonna plug SARS reporting a lot, and I'm gonna show you the easiest way to do it. It's just a push of a button on your mouse, okay? The Information Liaison Officer Network, that's mostly law enforcement officials that are your local representatives back to our statewide Information and Analysis Center, the SIAC, another acronym. And I'll talk about the Fusion Center here in a minute so you can understand your important role in feeding the SIAC good information. And it helps us understand what's going on out there. It builds that common operating picture. You know, the biggest mistake we can make in government is assume we know what you need and what you're up against. We need your input. We need that dialogue to help us understand what's really happening, what's the ground truth. And then especially during incident management, have that common operating picture. What's going on out there, what's where, what's important, what should we focus on protecting, dealing with, that sort of thing. All right, and there's lots of champions in the LERC, and I undoubtedly, well, there's already some strong champions in this Uinta Basin LERC. There's the details. It's the 16th at Moon Lake Electric in Roosevelt. It starts at 10:30. We'll shut it off at noon. I think Moon Lake's going to provide a little bit of groceries. So that always gets some people there for something to drink and a snack while we start to meet. And at that meeting, they are going to present on their critical operations, how they serve you as communities and as businesses and as well sites and, you know, your other critical ops here in this area. So for those of you that get invited in, it'll be a very informative meeting, amongst other things that we've got planned for that meeting. Uh-oh. Let's see if I can take care of this. I got it. Uh-oh. All right. That was the button of death. I'm done. Makes it really easy. The moral of that story is wear your glasses that you're holding in your hand. All right. I do have a backup here, but I don't think I can plug it in, but I can talk from it, so give me just a second here, okay? Sorry about that. That really dates me that I, A, didn't wear my glasses, and B, pushed the wrong button on the computer. All right. Yeah, what's my emergency plan? Here's my contingency plan. It's right here in my hand. Just let me find it. So while I'll have the benefit of seeing my presentation, I apologize that you won't, but at least I can speak from it while this thing boots back up. So let me get caught up here. So there's the dates again, May 16th, 10:30 at Moon Lake Electric offices. So I want to talk about SARS reporting, and I don't know if this thing will boot up in time, but I want you to record a website if you've got a pen in your hand. It's SIAC, S-I-A-C, at utah.gov. There's also one other address I'd like for you to write down, and it's SARS, S-A-R-S, at utah.gov. So if you go to SIAC.utah.gov, not SIAC at Utah, but SIAC.utah.gov, that's their website, you're going to get on a landing page that has 4 buttons on it. It's really simple. One of the buttons is Crime Tip Form, another one is Cybercrime Tip Form, and another one is Report Suspicious Activity, or SARS. Okay? And this is an easy template where you can simply fill out, hi, I'm Matt, I work at this site, out at this address, or these XY coordinates, here's what I experienced, and you said you wanted to know, thank you very much. And your law enforcement is also doing this as well when they interact with you. Hey, I have a question on that topic. By show of hands, is anyone aware that there's any oil field investigation training going on out here with local law enforcement? Talking with my peer up in North Dakota, who does a lot of work in that Bakken region, that's a strong public-private partnership that they've got underway, and they found it, the law enforcement officials up there found it very insightful. So that may be something we talk about at the LERC in the future, is because here's something in the threatscape that never changes. You're vulnerable to theft, vandalism, and if you're experiencing it, the rest of your industry is experiencing it. And there's the importance of reporting it so that we can understand just how prevalent it is and start looking at how do we build capabilities to deal with it. I heard some dramatic numbers for the expansion of operations out here in the next 10 or more years. Great opportunities, which also provide great opportunities for the bad guys. Okay, so we really need your help with the SARS reporting, and that's how you can either tap into the Fusion Center, the SIAC. What's a Fusion Center? Every state has this criminal intelligence nerve center that we call a Fusion Center. New York City has their own. Los Angeles has their own. And what we do is we receive and share information from three-letter agencies above us, county and municipal agencies below us, and states beside us. And it's very interesting how often we can connect the dots on what seems to be a very innocuous event occurring out in Uinta that could mean something else somewhere else. Okay, be part of some bigger investigation. So I'll just leave it at that. I'd also like to share with you the NCAS system, the National Cyber Awareness System. This is an information stream that you can sign up for. It comes from the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. CERT office. And you can get them daily, weekly, monthly, whatever you want. In this day of malicious cyber activity and your reliance upon the internet in certain processes, whether it's your enterprise or it's your site ops, I understand most of those sites are radioing out their information, but they're ultimately collected by strata networks out in this area, and they do go through their centers and off their network. So we work with them very closely and have been for a couple of years. In fact, we've got a huge project underway with them right now, looking at the resilience of their network, their data centers, and their other critical sites, okay? So the NCAS information streams would be very helpful to you. And again, I apologize, we're only less than 25% of the way through this update. www.us-cert.gov, that's CERT, us-cert.gov/NCAS. That'll take you to the landing page where you can sign up for bulletins, alerts, tips, and the current latest threats, okay? Because it's difficult to explain this particular slide, I'm going to forgo it. It's information on how to report a cyber concern in Utah. We'll leave it at that SARS address. We do have cybersecurity analysts that work there. We've also got infrastructure protection analysts that work as part of my team in that Fusion Center. We're there to work for you. We just need to know what you're up against. One last plug I'd like to give. If you have energy bills over $100,000 a year in Utah, the University of Utah has a free energy savings assessment. They got a grant from DOE. They'll come out and do a very thorough audit of your operations, your site, to determine where you might realize some savings. That's all at no cost to you. If you're interested in that, it's through the Intermountain Industrial Assessment Center. And it's all about energy audits and how you can save money. Qualified for that, you have to be spending more than $100,000 a year. And then the last thing I want to push out is the Great Utah Shakeout. Every year we have the Great Utah Shakeout this time of year. Okay, this one is going to be April 18th. You can go to the website, which is shakeout.org/Utah. And you can sign up for that. There's a tab there where you can even have some fun with it in your business office, or even at your home, or with any other group, and how you can participate in the Shakeout and get some education and some practice with that. So because the computer's not going to cooperate, and I think I'm up against time right now, I just want to say thanks again, everyone, for having me here. My email address is mbeaudry@utah.gov. mbeaudry@utah.gov. If you're interested in attending the LERC, please contact me. It's by invite. If you'd like to talk more about any of these capabilities that we can bring for you and for your benefit, please contact me. Thanks again.
Well, before we wrap up here, I'd just like to And also government agencies are involved with the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, the State Institutional Trust Lands, and the Office of Energy Management. So we appreciate that support. I'd like to turn the time over to Senator Ron Winterton. Ron, where are you at? There he is. Ron has always been a friend of the industry, and he moved on from county commissioner to senator, and he's going to give us a little legislative update and what happened on the Hill and explain it all to us and tell us how the sausage is made, right?
We're behind time right now, so we'll just leave it at that. But see, we had Senator Hinkins and Representative Chu here, and this session, I can't say that we won, but we did pass the liquid natural gas resolution in support of the promotion of natural gas out of the state, and the Jordan Cove project. That would be good for the basin. We were working on a couple of things to help the industry, and maybe I can just put a plug in right now, is that as we move forward into this next year, I need to know how we can help you do what you do. And if you look back on the session, they were doing a new revision of the sales tax, which was going to create tax on services. And I heard from a lot of you there, but they basically put that on the table, and now we're revisiting it throughout the summer to see where we can make up the shortfall that the state has. And it's not a revenue shortfall, it's just in the accounts, and we can't mess with the income tax account. The general sales tax is the one that's short. And so they'll be having workshops this summer and trying to get some ideas on where we can look at this. But as I look at your industry, one of the things that we could do to help the state out is that if we increase the production. But we have some challenges there, and it comes down to the transportation needs. And we are working on some pipelines and some rail, but that's not going to help us this year. And so we need to know what we can do to assist you in getting your product to market. And if you would bring ideas to us in which, if we need to do it policy-wise or if we need to do it legislative-wise, now's the time to do it, because they just informed me, and I'll be the chairman of the Utilities, Energy, and Technology interim chairman this summer, and we're trying to decide what areas or what bills we're going to deep dive into and massage them for next year. And so this would be a good time for you to get a hold of me or one of the state staff members, that we can go into that and come up with something that will be supportive. We will have some challenges. I ran a bill in which we tried to do a sales tax initiative to give you some incentives. So any product that you send out of the state, you'd be eligible for that credit. But we got it through the House, or through the Senate, and then we went to the House with it and died right there, because what they were trying to do with the sales tax was going to kill what I wanted to do with that. And that was all in a ploy to try to help you with your transportation, to give you about $4 a barrel back to help equal out the cost there. So that's, I'm looking at Representative Chu. I'm trying to think of anything else. We had a lot of electric bills, and so that industry, they want us to look at more renewables. They want us to study that this year, and really they're trying to come down on our industry. We can't change our economy here in the basin, and so we need to promote it, and we need to do it in a responsible way, which we always have done. We've just done a poor job at getting our message out. And so as we go into this next summer, we need to really get our message out there. And with that, I think I just, again, encourage you to let us know your needs. I've heard from, I visited with UDOT, and I was telling them some of the needs we need to improve out here, and they know about 191, but it's not a high priority. Well, when I told them how much oil we're sending over there to put on the rail, that was alarming to them, but they didn't hear about it. They didn't know. Those are the type of things that we need to communicate better, telling them that our plans include putting more oil over there, and you guys need to take us seriously that, you know, it might be a safety hazard for us and the residents of Utah traveling that road. So what can we do as a state to assist you? That's the kind of information we're looking at. So please, let's have this a two-way communication, and I'll be supportive and help you do what you do. Thanks again.
Thank you, Senator Winterton. And just to close up, we're going to turn some time over to Uinta County Commissioner Bill Stringer just to give an overview from Uinta County, and we'll wrap up after that.
Thank you, John. Thanks to everybody who is here today. You're here because you want to learn. You're here because you want to know what the problems are. You're here hopefully to see how we can solve some of those problems. You're still here because you either lost track of time or you thought lunch was after this. Sorry. Anyway, we'll go ahead and make it short and sweet. I don't want to try and thank everyone who really made this come together, because I would also forget somebody. But thanks to Duchesne County for hosting, thanks to the Governor's Office of Energy Development, and thanks to Dogum for putting all this together. Thanks to all the speakers. Again, we'll stop right about there. As an elected official, and as the elected officials in the basin, we appreciate the responsible development of oil and gas. We really do. Hydrocarbons are one of the reasons that we are here in the first place. We enjoy having you here. We want to be sure that we support you. And when you hear things like, you do know that we are trying to diversify our economy, not because we want to have an alternative to oil and gas, but to make living in the basin, working in oil and gas, a better experience. We want to be more than just an oil and gas place. We want to be a place to live where that you want to be here. So it will never be as we work towards diversifying, it's not to replace you, it's to just augment the experience. We do support that. We don't support some of the things that are going on around us. We don't support the notion of the fear of oil and gas. There's states, you know who they are, that are trying on a global level to say, no oil and gas, no fracking, no, just plain no. That is not what we support. We support solving the problems. And we know we have the challenges. We've got transportation is a problem. Air quality, it's a challenge. But we're not looking to hope it goes away. We're not looking to put our heads in the sand and pretend it's not there. We're looking at solving the problem. That's the whole point. So with that, this afternoon, I think over in Roosevelt, 2 o'clock, is it 2 o'clock? 2:30. The ozone, there is a group. This is what we're looking for as problem solvers. And this group this afternoon is a big step in that direction. We meet at 2:30 until 4, talking about, till 3? Till 4:30. Oh, God. I thought dinner was going to be right after that. Anyway, solve the problems. Not pretend they're not there, not throw fits and hope that someone will just make it go away. We're going to solve them. And your participation in that is what we look forward to. So again, thank you all for coming. Appreciate it, and look forward to seeing a lot of you later this afternoon.
Before you run off, I won't lose that. Oh, you would have found me.
Yeah, I know where you live.
So I guess someone said, John got me a well. John got me a drilling rig to go visit.
Oh, yeah. Who is it?
Preston. Okay, good. Someone said I'd never get Finley to do it.